Welcome to They Mostly Pot Out at Night. Mostly, I am your host Salem, joined by my co-host Graveyard. This is our episode. This is episode 2 of our new weekly All Things Horror podcast. Our topic for this week is the before times, also known as in the beginning. We're going to start off with a small section of horror writers. We know there's a lot more, and there'll probably be more episodes later on expanding more of them. But today we're going to focus on Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, because they have a large influence on the horror world. They continue to keep making adaptations of their works over 100 years later, and in just about both cases now. And so they're still around. Their influence is huge. So we're just going to talk a little bit about them and some of the adaptations and things that have been happening with their stories, both in the past and in the future. So we're going to start. Just a little intro here is our favorite stories from both authors. I will start with my favorite Poe story would be The Cask of Amontillado, or Amontillado, depending on where you are. I looked up the pronunciation online and looking for pronunciations, and it's both. It's either one, so it's either or. So I guess either one is correct. But that would be my favorite one. And I remember we had to read it for, I think it was middle school. And it was at the time where I was obsessed with Latin and Latin phrases and trying to learn as much Latin as I could. And there's a cool saying in that story. And it's, I believe it was the crest of his family. And it was, Nemo me impune lasacit, which means no one provokes me without punishment, which is essentially the whole story of him getting revenge.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I never had the opportunity to read these in middle school or high school for me personally. But no, like I said, that's a great story. It's a good one to as well. I think my favorite is the case of Mr. Vladimir. How do you say it?
Valdemar.
Valdemar, yeah. Because it's on the cusp of death that he was trying to hypnotize someone to see kind of how much control he would have over him, and it was kind of veering into mysticism or hypnosis. And the story that plays out for me is just kind of really interesting, that you're taking a little bit of science or trying to figure out science with someone being on the verge of death, right? And how much control the mind has over the body and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a fascinating subject. Good choice. Favorite Lovecraft story, mine would be The Shadow over Innsmouth, just because I love the creepiness of it. I don't think they've had any really good adaptations of it yet. Hopefully there will be in the future. There's people that have taken bits and pieces of it, but I don't think there's been anything full on with that story yet. I hope they will be in the future.
Right, because I believe that's one of the stories that Richard Stanley's trying to do, right?
I believe so. The next one that he was going to do was going to be the Dunwich Horror.
Right.
But from the last I heard, is his funding got pulled.
Really?
Yes.
That's a shame. Yeah.
Yes.
Because with his movie, especially adaptation, my favorite Lovecraft story is the Color Out of Space. Right. I think that we have a couple adaptations, and it's sci-fi, right? It's a meteor that comes down and kind of exposes people to, I don't know what you call it, mutation, radiation, whatever you want to call it.
Mutation, radiation. That's good. I like that.
and having rewatched some of these things, is I kind of view like the Meteor episodes that was in Creepshow that starred Stephen King. I feel it's kind of reminiscent of that story in a way.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah.
It's a meteor comes down, so that Stephen King played the big idiot, right?
Meteor shit.
Meteor shit. Right. Right. So yeah, like I said, for me, I like it because it is otherworldly and kind of how people would react in a rural environment to anything that comes down out of space and trying to figure out what it is. And Rich Chen, I think, nailed it with the body horror elements of the story too.
He did, and don't forget that was also Lovecraft's favorite story too. So you have good choice.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't read in a long time a lot of Lovecraft. For this podcast, I pretty much picked up the top tales of Poe and kind of read them through just in prepping and watching these movies. Um, I got a nice leather binder, like 800-page H.P. Lovecraft that I want to dive back into. I had stories from Lovecraft in the past, but didn't really include everything I wanted to do for this podcast and rewatching. So I think it was a good find. It's just something I want to pick up and read more horror as I got out of it a while ago.
Right. Now, I had read just about all the stories that had been adapted that we're going to talk about. But there were a few years ago, back when I was a security guard and I had nothing to do but read. So I read just about every Poe story, every Lovecraft story during that time period. So it's been a while, but I still remember it. I had to refresh myself with a few of the stories. Just as I was watching the movies, I just wanted I don't think it went like that. I had to go back and just kind of review it and make sure I would know the changes.
Right.
Yeah, mostly what I was missing out on was most of these movies. The vast majority of these I had not watched before, so I spent a lot of time this week watching old movies, just to kind of catch up and make sure that I watch the ones that I know that we're going to be discussing, at least the major points.
Right. Yeah. For me, I had a couple of DVDs. I don't know why I picked them up. I think because they're part of like the Midnight Munchie double packs that exist on DVDs back in the day. I think it was The Masquerade Death, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was. It might have been The Pit and the Pendulum on the DVD set for me. But you were introduced to this stuff in middle school. I don't think I was introduced to really Poe until the Treehouse of Terror episode where they essentially read The Raven as a 15-minute clip, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is if you look online, they have the best Poe adaptations of all time. Almost every single one of those lists contains that Simpsons episode. So it is one of the better Poe adaptations. Even though it is The Simpsons, it is still considered a very faithful adaptation.
Right. And I mean, so that's Poe. But I mean, when do you think you've heard of Lovecraft? Because I don't think I really got into it later on, which we'll discuss these movies a little bit. But I feel like it wasn't something a name I heard growing up.
I'm not sure exactly when I heard it. I'm pretty sure it had to do with D&D. Because I was big into D&D, and a lot of those, monsters and stuff ended up coming over to D&D. So I'm sure in my, reading on the fringes of D&D stuff, I had heard about it. I know I had started reading Lovecraft in high school. But again, I'm not exactly sure how I got turned on to it, but I mean, I was, playing D&D since like 5th grade. So at some point between 5th grade and high school is when I found out about it.
Yeah, because I started D&D mid-ish 90s, and I can see that because a lot of Eldritch Terrors, or the old ones or stuff like that, is in D&D. I like a lot of their creature descriptions. I would say come easily. I could definitely see that coming from Lovecraft.
Yeah. No, yeah. There's also Lovecraft has his own tabletop RPG called Call of Cthulhu, which is, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I have the book if you ever want to take a look at it. But it basically revolves around sanity and maintaining your sanity.
Okay. So that's interesting. That might tie into kind of what we see with some of the Betrayal of the House on the Hill, right? That there's a lot of, now I think about it, there are some Lovecraftian elements in there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's there's definitely roots of both of them. They're definitely in just about everything.
Which I find amazing that for not being a well-known name, that as far as I'm aware of, that how much Lovecraft is now ingrained into pop culture, right? We have Cthulhu cats, we have Cthulhu card games. I know Munchkins has, a Cthulhu set that you can play for the card game.
Yeah, I see little cutie cartoons of little Cthulhus all the time. So yeah, definitely in the mainstream these days.
I can't recall what brought that on.
I don't know.
That's interesting. Huh. Research.
Right.
Like I said, it's kind of everywhere, but and I think Poe is too, but not as much as Lovecraft right now. We'll discuss that in a bit of
Right.
what it is. But do you want to get into some of these movies that we sat through this week?
Yes. We will start with the movies based on Edgar Allan Poe works. I guess the most famous of which would be in the 60s. It would be the Poe cycle done by Roger Corman. Almost all of them starring Vincent Price. They started in 1960, and that was House of Usher, and that was one of the movies that I watched this week. I thought it was great. It was pretty faithful to the story. I mean, the only real major change they made is that the guy was concerned for his fiance rather than just being the random friend of the guy coming over. Right. Yeah, because the original story, just some random dude comes over and witnesses this whole thing, but doesn't really have an attachment to the woman in the story. And in the movie, they made him a fiance to have an emotional attachment to it. But other than that, it was a pretty faithful adaptation. But it was pretty good. It was definitely one of the high bars for it. It definitely started out on a high note.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, with Mr. Usher, as you always call him, right? That I think a big thing is, they weren't childhood friends. He wasn't coming to see his childhood friend from, it was like, it said like 20 years later or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't seen since then. And kind of watching him in the last state of the House of Usher, right? And they kind of made Vincent Price's Mr. Usher kind of a villain, I feel, that really wasn't there. And I think that's a kind of a common thing we see in these Poe adaptations and the Poe stories is there's not necessarily like a protagonist and antagonist. It's kind of like all internal monologue and just like a narration.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, they also had to adapt it into the movies of the 60s. And the movies of the 60s were very much, the vast majority of them had a clear protagonist, a clear antagonist, So they had to try to fit that niche in there. I mean, obviously they did take some chances at here and there. I'm not saying they totally followed the formula, but yeah, I think they had to kind of, wiggle themselves into that known realm.
Right. And don't get me wrong, Vincent Price, I love Vincent Price. I think his work he's done, I've always loved. He usually plays, I'd say, a villain, almost, right?
Yeah, or he plays a character that you would think is the villain. He's supposed to be a creepy villain-esque character. Yeah, he always plays that kind of character.
Right, and I think it really shines, especially in House of Usher.
Yeah, he was good at it. He was great at it, and that's why he kept doing it. That's why he kept getting work, because he was awesome at it.
Yeah, his voice was very unique. His acting mannerisms, I'd say, is very play-like, stage-like that. I think in the 60s, we were still in the atomic age of horror movies and really gearing more towards sci-fi. And here's Roger Corman, who did a lot of those B sci-fi movies as well, but then bring it up, I think very colorful sets, very elaborate set pieces. And I think that really shows in the 60s, right? It's almost like you're watching a play, but in movie form, I feel.
Right. No, yeah, it was definitely great. I mean, yeah, he definitely has that theatrical presence. But yeah, like you said, the movies of that time period were still in a lot of ways closer to theater than present day anyway.
And I would argue that you could say that for a lot of horror, is horror being like some of the first movies ever made, that it was very, we discussed this last time, atmospheric, very big stages, if you will, that you have to plan, that it's just very elaborate in their set pieces. And I think the House of Usher really showcased that too.
Right. And I think they used the same dead trees, the same castle front, and the same door in almost every single one of these movies. They just threw a coat of paint on the door and changed the knocker out. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure it was the exact same. Like, also, it had the matte painting of the house on that shore on the beach. That shore beach was the same in every movie. They just changed the painting of the house that was up on the hill.
Right. And I think, even talking about paintings, I think the paintings that Usher was doing in that movie, that style, you see through a good number of these movies that going down the years. You recall him like his paintings that are very. I'm not. I don't know art very well to describe it, but it's very like unique in their paintings. Like they have the portraits of their family that they had. I think we saw that kind of throughout these movies of the Corman era.
Yeah, they were like I want to kind of label it as like evil psychedelic. They were like very brightly weird colors, but also dark at the same time.
Right, and I think that helped like illuminate and make it feel like the stage where things are brighter, more colorful than usually what we see in horror movies. Horror movies are usually dark and dim. And I like that fact, like in House of Usher when he's lighting the two candles. Like, let me light these two candles also get brighter in the room, even though it's like daylight.
Right.
He's like, I can't close the curtains. I can't stand the light, and it's still the same lightness in the room. And it's very like spotlightish or very stage lighting.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Yeah, you could tell there was like a spotlight on where the exactly where the candle is, and when they put it out, they just turn that light off.
Right, and and doing theater in high school and being a techie and doing sound and lighting, and I did work spotlight and built set pieces. I very much see that, and I think that what makes it really, really work, despite some Corman not having some of the greatest films, but like the atmosphere presentation was perfect, I think.
Yeah, no, it was great. I thought it was a great start.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to say about Usher? So I move on to the next one.
No, I think even though they elaborate, because I was like 6-page story.
Yeah, very short.
That I mean, yes, it took liberties to build a more a story, right? Not just a narration, which is really hard to do. But yeah, I mean, that's the next one we just watched or chronologically was The Pit and Pendulum.
Yeah, The Pit and the Pendulum in 1961. So, but what are the?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm saying, how did you like that movie?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it was one of the stories that I remember liking as a kid, but I remember, I guess the things that you focus on when you're younger are a lot different as the things that you focus on when you're older. But I thought it was good. I thought it was a good adaptation of it. I mean, I loved the matte paintings at the end of the pit. was fantastic. I thought.
Now, obviously, I would, if like I said, crammed a lot in this week.
Right.
Pendulum was more of a pitch black environment that the narrator is in, right? That I feel like a lot of the story that took place before we got to the actual pit and the actual pendulum, which was in like the last 5 minutes of the movie,
right,
the hour and 20-minute movie. I feel like it could have been better because, right, that the idea is, in the story at least, that he's assuming in prison that he's feeling around what he considers his cell in the dark, right? And he realizes that he's somewhere in there is a pit, right? I don't recall the reason why we got into the pit pendulum, was that really in the story versus the movie, or was that all just lead up to the pit and pendulum?
I think most of the stuff that happened before was just told through like him recalling things on how he got there. I mean, the story didn't focus on anything that happened before, and I think the way that the story moved and the movie moved is, I think they were just trying to organically show you, a way that this could happen. That this, these people could end up in the pit and the pendulum in that day and age, and focus on it, and this could happen. Is they had to go over the whole thing about his dad being an Inquisition torturer, right. and then they had to separately go over the whole thing of like, oh, he witnessed his dad, torture his mom and his uncle, stuff like
Right.
that, and then they had to push him too far so that he broke and then became that instead of just being that. You know, like the short.
Right.
I mean, they could have cut an hour out of that story by just saying he is this instead of organically trying to introduce all that stuff in there. And I think all that, yeah, that first hour, I think that's all it was trying to do.
Right. And would you say that in the story, do you think that was a jail cell or do you think that was a torture room? Because his essentially options were, yeah, he was getting food. Yeah, mice were kind of going over his body. He was afraid to move because of the pendulum that there was there with the clock above him.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it seemed like his two options were fall into this unknown pit or gets cut in half by the pendulum.
Right.
I don't feel like that part was really portrayed well enough in the movie.
No, not at all. I mean, yeah, there wasn't a choice at all. It was the only people that ended up in the pit were people that were thrown in the pit, and then
Right.
pendulum was just there as like a a suspense tactic.
Right. And once again, Vincent Price shining through.
Yeah, no, yeah, he did a great job. Yeah, because he also had to, he had played his crazy torturer dad, and then he had to play, the tortured son of that dad, and then he had to be the possessed version of the son with the dad's ghost.
Right. Now, do you see any correlation between Pit and Pendulum and Saw?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it probably built the foundation for that. I'm sure there were other steps in the middle there, but I didn't think I don't think it went straight from Pit and the Pendulum to Saw, but I think there were steps in the middle that led up to that. But I mean, essentially, yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of story. Somebody trapped in a room.
Right.
Somebody put them there in some kind of peril, and they
right. And
may or may not be able to get out. Right, yeah.
And I know there was a pendulum in one of the Saw contraptions. I don't recall which Saw it was. Maybe number 4.
I think it was Saw 14.
Maybe. But no, I mean, overall, I think obviously with a movie, you can't just have someone sit there in almost complete darkness, right? We're not going to be able to really see that well enough.
Yeah, it would just be a black screen with a person narrating over it, with maybe some machinery clunking in the background. That would be, yeah, if they tried to stay close to the story as possible, that would have to be it.
Now, would this been better as a radio broadcast then?
I don't know about that. Radio broadcast is kind of hard to tell between like what you're thinking and what you're saying.
Right.
Because it sounds exactly the same. I mean, you can do it obviously, but you have to you have to force it to be an aside otherwise. But I mean, I think it would be a good radio broadcast. You could do it well, definitely.
Okay. I mean, yeah, like I said, I think a lot of horror, like I said, Saw and stuff like this, we do see elements of some of these other things, right? And kind of just going back to the House of Usher, I forgot to mention it, is, that's one of Mike Flanagan's next upcoming series he's doing is The Fall of the House of Usher. And I think he's going to do a good job. We can discuss that later on, but I know that's coming out at some point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, yeah, because it's going to be a show. It's going to be like at least a season-long show based on a 10-page story. So that's going to be interesting in how that fleshes out. But I mean, I've liked everything he's done so far. So I mean, I have faith that it'll be good. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think a lot of liberties obviously are going to have to be taken for it. But we can go from there, and the next movie in 1962, The Premature Burial.
Yeah, now this one I did not watch at all, and it sounds like I dodged a bullet on that one. So I'll let you run with it.
Yes. So we can briefly discuss the story. Is I feel like a very common theme with Poe stuff that we read for this recording is people obsessed with being buried alive. That's a couple. I think going back to House of Usher, buried his sister alive, or thought that was a recurring theme. And the premature burial is a guy who has, I don't know what you want to call it. I think they call it swooning in the story, that he would, or like a living death, where he was still technically alive and was having episodes where he was unable to move. but his
Yeah, I'm
mind
pretty
is different.
sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this was one of Poe's like real life fears because it happens in a lot of his stories.
Right. There's most of them that deal with death or mausoleums. There's always someone that they find premature buried. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So and especially with this being the first half of the 1800s and science, medical science, Western medicine not be, kind of starting to take root, right? Where we have physicians, we just don't declare people dead. And I think, this worked as the story because I think there was a fear. I mean, do we think that the, rope tied inside a coffin with a bell on the outside for the bell toes is fiction, or do you think that actually happened?
It did. I mean, I've seen like like drawings of the designs of coffins like that, and I think they were. I mean, I think it was more of a rich person thing. Is I mean, like the middle class, lower class people could not afford that. I'm sure they would love it, because I'm sure it was a very real fear for them. But yeah, it was
Right.
more like of selling that stuff to rich people because they have disposable income and they'll spend money on it. And it's very easy to scare people into, hey, what if you get buried alive? You want this bell to save you, kind of thing, right?
Right.
So
And
yeah, I think they definitely did exist. It just wasn't a mainstream thing simply because it was too expensive.
I think the drawings weren't they patents? I
Yeah,
believe. Yeah.
yeah, I believe so.
And so, obviously, short story. The guy has these episodes. He is obsessed of not being buried alive. I believe his dad was like I believe someone in his family also was buried alive, and they didn't find out until they dug it up a little bit later that happened. So he obsessed staying in his group of friends that knew his wishes, that he wanted to have the rope in there with the bell attached, that he wanted to be able to tell people, hey, I'm alive, come get me out of here. And that kind of happens in the story. Like it was almost kind of a fake out where he traveled outside his known area, right? And he had one of his episodes, and he thought he was confined in a box, and I believe it turned out that he was just on a ship, right? Is that the story I'm thinking of? I believe.
Yeah, it sounds right.
Yeah. Which did not happen in the movie. Um, they kind of went into a more elaborate setup where he had the mausoleum, that he had the like coffin with the door that would slide open if he pushed hard onto it, or that he had like escape rooms built into the crypt that he was able to escape in the movie, right? Um, so that's kind of what he was doing. He's like, I'm setting all this up. He's letting his wife know. He's letting his doctors know that this is where, when I die, or if you think I'm dead, put me here and I can come out. But to, you know, elaborate on the story, they had his wife having an affair with one of the doctors who presumed and announced him dead. So it kind of came a revenge story in the movie where they buried him not where he wanted to be, and that grave robbers came and were digging him up for another doctor colleague to test experiments and look at his condition more. He kind of wanted to scare him into that and have his wife think he's dead, and he ends up killing the uh, grave robbers, and then started exacting revenge on people that did this to him. The doctor, and then going after his wife and buried her alive knowingly, and then he gets shot by the other doctor that his wife was having an affair with. And it's all just kind of like a revenge story in here, which obviously a big leap from the story. But it worked. I think it worked pretty well overall. And I believe this is one of the few movies that Vincent Price was not in. He was not in this movie. You would think that maybe he would have played the main guy. Guy is his name, right?
Right.
But no, it wasn't Vincent Price. I don't know why, but it was an okay story, just like a revenge story. But
Well, maybe that's why I skipped it. I don't know. I looked through these, and I watched the ones that looked the most interesting to me, and that one did not strike my interest, so I skipped over it. So you had to deal with that.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, it for that to be a thing was, I want to say when I was doing the research that people didn't know if this actually happened or not, and that like Poe had the right to people at Reddit saying, no, this actually didn't happen. This is a work of fiction, because this is, like I said, early 1800s, that maybe fiction like this wasn't a common thing for the general public to have, right?
Well, yeah, but I think it was also a very real fear for people of that time. And if you're writing a story to remind people of it, they're going to freak out.
Right.
I think that was more what it was. He was saying, no, it's fiction. Calm down, relax. The world's not ending.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, what kind of came first? Was it just his fear, or did this story kind of spark those patents and the idea? Does reality become works of fiction or based on fiction at that point?
Well, yeah, I think it was just the state of the medical profession at that time, so where it was very real. Like, people would, oh yeah, they're dead, and then they'd wake up an hour or two later. I think it happened often enough, not often, but often enough to where people were scared. Like, oh wow, I really don't want to do that. Right. Like they do, like in the stories where they'd go up to them with the mirror and they'd hold the mirror underneath their nose. We're like, oh, it didn't fog up, they're dead. I mean, that was it. That was like their official cause of death. Like, oh, well, they're dead. No fog in the mirror. It's over.
Right. Which I think they use the same mirror in all these movies too.
Oh yeah. I'm pretty sure it was the same house. They just moved stuff around in the house, because I've seen the same decorations in there. There's in different places.
Yeah, I feel like, especially the staircase, that railing, like when the fall of House of Usher was going on, the house was starting to collapse. Like he breaks that railing. I'm pretty sure I saw that railing definitely in at least one other movie.
Oh yeah. Like I said, the trees in the front yard and that front door of that castle was used at least 3 times that I saw. So I'm sure it was more than that.
Which makes sense, because these were big set pieces. Really made it seem like they're big set pieces. It takes a lot to build the stage for these.
Right. Okay, you ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is Tales of Terror. Also came out in 1962. And this one took a slightly different path, where it actually did 3 different stories, all packed into that same hour and a half time period. They did it's short film versions of a few different stories. The first one is based on Morella. The second one is based on a kind of amalgamation of The Black Cat and The Cask of Amontillado. And the last one is your favorite story of The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar.
Yes.
Now, The Black Cat, I'm going to talk later, because I watched a lot of these Black Cat adaptations. And I'm going to go over a lot of those later on. But I will say this one is mostly The Cask of Amontillado anyway.
Yes.
The Black Cat, I mean, there is an alcoholic guy who doesn't like the cat. And then at the end, the cat is in the bricked up wall, and that's pretty much the only similarity. The rest of it is The Cask of Amontillado. So,
yeah, I mean, and each one of these shorter stories in the movie has been surprised. He was in all
yes,
right?
Yes, correct.
Absolutely.
They had to make up for the last one where he wasn't in it at all, so they made him 3 different characters.
Right. So of the 3 there, which one do you like the most of the 3 stories?
I would say, I mean, The Black Cat, which is really The Cask of Amontillado, but I mean, I like that one the most. I mean, I think it was interesting that Vincent Price was not the main character in that story. He was kind of like a secondary character, a supporting character, if you will. And Peter Lorre was the main character.
Also a staple of horror. Peter
right,
Lorre.
right,
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, that one was my favorite, just because I mean, there was like no. The guy was just a jerk. I mean, he was just a bad guy. I mean, there's like no, like there's nothing good about him in the whole story. I don't think he did one good thing.
No, not at all. Not at all. Like I said, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, Vincent Price is the old guy who's dying from a painful disease. I don't know if it ever said. I think they said is what it might have been.
He's old. He was dying from old.
Dying from old. Yes, he was dying from old. And we had Basil Rathbone, who we see as in some horror, but more of Sherlock Holmes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see him in there. Like I said, the case. I don't think I read. Recently, I know I read it, but like I said, it's the idea of it, the hypnotism, the trance, and kind of like coming out of the vegetative or zombie state to exact revenge, and kind of like I would say probably, and that part of it was the most graphic, if you will, because he had the oozing body falling on top of the doctor, right?
Right.
And I think it was pretty big. I mean, yeah, we had scratches from cats, we had a little bit of blood, and horror was starting to take shape of what we could show, what we couldn't show, and when they show blood, there's very, very bright red blood, like that we wouldn't see again really into the 80s to get past the R rating, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think
not blood colored blood.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, back in those days, they were going for more theatrics, and you wanted, the blood to be bright red, so everyone knew exactly what it was. And yeah, in the 80s is where you started to get like, no, we want it to look real. So that's when you get into like, the darker, Tom Savini formula blood.
Right. But as you know as well, like with Evil Dead 2, the blood's right on the walls. They couldn't have that much red, so they had to make it green and black. And I think, the censors really got a hold of stuff in the 80s because of all the gore. Because of people Tom Savini making it so realistic looking.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's a trick in video games too. Is if you want to make it not M, just have the enemies bleed green or white. Oh, it's just sweat. It's not blood. It's sweat, or it's an alien, so it's okay. Yeah, they get rid of that M title.
It's black for robots.
Yeah, it's oil. Like right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, like you're saying with the Black Cat, though, we have the main premise is he's a drunk, doesn't like the cat, but they brought Vincent Price's character in there to be, I think a very comedic. This is a more comedic story of this movie, right?
Oh yeah, this is definitely the comic relief, right? Yeah, this is definitely the comic relief in the middle, right?
Yeah, which Peter Lorre was good for comedy, but like I said, Vincent Price, it just seemed like he hammed it up a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean, he was doing his best theatrical comedy. Yes,
right. Just yeah. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think these worked as a whole because they're not long stories, and we didn't have to have the hour 20, hour 30 of these. I think they made a really good choice of condensing these down to let's say 30-minute movies,
right?
And that's something I think we discussed later is how we can do this again. It's kind of where I'd like to see this direction take. I really think they should have just continued this. They could have covered more Poe stories across the board if they'd done more Tales of Terror. But as far as Onward, I don't recall very many movies doing that. They had 3 different stories taking place. There's more of a TV show that would do that, or a serial that you'd watch before a movie, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only ones that really come to mind is like the Twilight Zone or like Tales from the Dark Side. You know, like where they had like multiple different mini stories inside of one. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's been a few that do it, but yeah, I mean, not enough. I would say like they're usually pretty good. But yeah, I would say the first one, the Morella, I thought that one was probably the weakest of the 3. I didn't think there was anything all that special and great about it. It was a good lead in, to get you, I guess, used to what you're watching. But yeah, the other 2 were, in my eyes, superior.
Well, I mean, it's if we look at think about it that way, it's a vengeful spirit story, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the mother dies in childbirth, that the father couldn't bury his wife after she said 26 years or something like that.
Yeah, she looked pretty good for being 26 years rotten.
Right. And I think that's also a big thing that they show a lot is either they're buried alive or they're decaying bodies.
Yep.
And especially for Valdemar, that his body decayed. So it was kind of like, it's a good intro to revengeful spirits that kind of ties into the Black Cat and then furthering the body decay that was there. I was like, for the 60s, considering what we see less than a decade later, pretty big, I think, for horror movies to kind of show that.
Yeah, it was definitely the start of what came later in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
It's the foundations.
Laying the roots. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I've never expected that from Roger Corman. Honestly. So, we can go right into the next movie.
The Raven, which is probably the most famous of Poe's works. 1963. I did not watch this one. I think I did not watch it simply because I knew it would be the most famous and most popular, and I didn't want to bother. But I'm assuming Vincent Price is in it. Is that correct?
I did not watch this one either, because it's such a more well known story, and I think we all know the story. He's lamenting over his lost love, right?
Right.
And then he's being tortured by what we consider the spirit in the Raven. Would you agree? I mean, do you think that's a good kind of
Yep, that's the synopsis.
Right.
Yeah, a guy who's being tortured by a bird who's not really doing anything, only reminding him of his own,
right,
inadequacies.
And so I think The Simpsons probably did better. But yes, Vincent Price, of course, in it. And wow, we also have supposedly, looking this up, Peter Lorre as well.
Is he?
Boris Karloff.
Wow, maybe I probably should have watched this one then.
I think I need to go back and watch this. And Jack Nicholson
as a baby.
As a baby in 1963.
I'm kidding.
I'm 26.
I know. It's hard. It's hard to see Jack Nicholson and Vincent Price being in the same era. That's all.
It is weird to think about because I think most people think of Jack Nicholson being One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest first. Clearly, this obviously he has.
Well, I mean, he was around first. That was definitely his breakthrough role,
right?
But yeah, that wasn't until what, 70s,
75. Yeah, so I mean, here you go. Here's just another. Oh no, Little Shop of Horrors. Before that, he played the Bill Murray character. He played the guy obsessed with the sadomasochist that loved going to the dentist.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, that's the character. So just we're already seeing some starts of a trend that we would see later on of big well-known actors starting in horror, right?
Right.
Which is pretty amazing. I need to go back and watch this now because there's some big names in there.
Yeah, like I said, I probably should have. I just didn't. Well, you know what? I mean, the reviews are pretty middling on it. I think that's what it was. I was trying to pick out, the pick of the litter by saying, "Oh, which ones are the best rated?" I'll watch those.
Right. So yeah, we'll go back, watch it. Maybe we can revisit even if we discuss actors and first horror movie roles as a topic. We mark this down and take note of it. That hey, here we are. Here's Jack Nicholson that we know today. Because I'd say Peter Lorre, Boris Karloff, Vincent Price are already known for their horror and not much else outside of that.
Right. But yeah, we'll swing back to that one.
Yes.
And the other one that came out in 1963 is interesting because it's called The Haunted Palace, which is a Poe poem, but the story is actually based on an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. At the time, I did not know that, so I didn't watch it. Although I probably should have, knowing what we were going to talk about both of these authors today. I probably should have watched it because it's an interesting crossover of the two, but I did not. So
Yeah, so
did,
I watched this, and you right away. I mean, the atmosphere very Roger Corman. The atmosphere fits very well into here. Now, we need a little bit more research as to why we adapted H.P. Lovecraft. Like, I think this might be really close to the first Lovecraftian adaptation that we got. You know what I mean?
yeah, I think the very first one was that Die Monster Die.
Die Monster Die. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But the Haunted Palace is, Vincent Price. He plays Charles Dexter Ward, and he then, he essentially gets burned at the stake for being a wizard, right? And then, he curses the town because of it. And so, randomly, somehow the Emperor is back type of scenario. His great-grandson, or great-great-grandson, 110 years later, happens to stumble away into the town, which, believe it or not, is called Arkham, which is another dead giveaway that this is H.P. Lovecraft, because Arkham comes up in a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, it's Arkham and Miskatonic are the two things that he likes to say.
Right. So, and it essentially what's happening is we have another big horror great here of Lon Chaney Jr. playing one of the friends who's trying to bring back the ghost of their friend that died. And they happen to reach from the Necronomicon, which huge H.P. Lovecraft stuff. Most of his stuff revolves around the Necronomicon in a lot of his stories, right? So he's getting his grandson to stay in the house. The friends or carekeepers of the house are trying to convince his great-grandson to stay there, and he's able to move his spirit that was burned at the stake 110 years ago into his, descendant's body and start taking over. And he eventually does take over his body, and then he goes on and starts murdering the descendants of those that killed him. Another revenge story, but haven't we seen this quite a bit? Don't we see this in legacies at this point in time? In the past 50 years of horror movies, where you have a descendant that is being influenced or swayed by someone that was not necessarily wrongfully killed, but killed, and exacting revenge. I think that is we're seeing another staple of horror in this aspect from this movie. So, like I said, it's a very interesting take. And I wonder why there's so much post stuff that we'd be leaning very heavily into Lovecraft. Maybe it's because of the story that the kind of building of wrongful deaths, vengeful spirits, and kind of like out of body possessions or horror, right? I can see them doing that.
Yeah, or maybe they just had a script laying around. They were like, "Hey, quick, give me a spooky, scary script. I'm gonna make a Poe movie out of it." And maybe that's it.
It's entirely possible. I mean, we're 6 into the Roger Corman, the American International Pictures production of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're kind of winding down. Maybe they weren't getting the funding. And I honestly don't know why they did it that way. It worked. It says, in the title, Edgar Allan Poe's The Haunted Palace, which, great title, yes. Story, no.
Well, yeah, there's a few of those. Again, and the Black Cat discussion we'll have later. I'll talk about that. But yes, that had to happen a whole lot.
Yeah.
You ready for the next one?
Yeah. It's next one is. I had a hard time watching it. I have it on DVD. I had a hard time watching it again for some reason. I really don't know why.
Really? See, I really like this one. It's The Mask of the Red Death. Came out in 1964. The basic plot is that some big mean noble person that has his castle and rules over his little kingdom. He finds out that there's a plague, literally called the Red Death. This just causes people to bleed out of their face and die.
Right.
So he retreats back to his castle to stay away from the plague, and he invites all of his underlings, the other noble people of his domain to come in and hide with him in the castle.
Like
While they're waiting out this plague.
Right.
Now the movie, introduces some other elements like this peasant girl that he brings in and tries to make a princess. Weird, she's a big part of the story, but she doesn't exist in the original short story. But she's a big part of the movie. But yeah, essentially, so he's just being a big mean jerk and making people do horrible things because he's the leader, and
Right.
The movie leans heavily into him being a Satanist, like a self-proclaimed Satanist. The story doesn't specifically say that at all. He's just an ass in the story.
Right, and he punishes those that follow Christianity and tell them to, the peasant girl's boyfriend and father that he wants them to fight to the death, and spare him and see where your God is now type scenario.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's just torture stuff. And the main story, they talk, basically the party takes place in like these 7 colored rooms, which they do touch on in the movie. They go into like the yellow room, the purple room, the white, they're there and they party in those rooms, but it's not a big focus of it. In the movie, the last room is where all the bad stuff happens. And in the story, they're all scared to go in the last room because it's all black. It's all black with like red light, so it looks really evil. So everybody's scared to go in there. So of course, that's where the bad stuff happens. In the movie, it's just kind of like, yeah, this is where the bad stuff is.
Now, isn't there also a clock that's chiming like every hour? Like when it chimes, they stop, and for whatever reason, right? And they go on there.
Yeah, they all stop and watch the chimes, and then they go back in after it's done.
Right.
And then in both sides of the story, this person in red shows up to the story, and he assumes that it's Satan, his buddy.
Right. Yes.
But in the story, they're just like, "Oh, who are you? Who are you?" And they keep and he keeps getting away from them, and then eventually, when they trap them, in the original story, they pull his mask off and he's just gone. He just disappears. Right. And then they all have the plague and they all die. And then in the movie, it's more like, they kind of, I guess, suggest that it's Satan, that he's not really actually happy about his person that describes himself as his follower, and he just wants to get rid of him because he's given him a bad name kind of thing. But then there's like all the other people in the different colored robes anyway. So who knows? Maybe it's just like,
well, that figure also, when the boyfriend of the peasant girl that he takes in escapes, he talks to him and he thinks it's God.
Right?
And then
I don't know if he thinks it's God, but he definitely thinks it's somebody that's in charge or somebody that's powerful.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because here we are 2022 talking about the fear mongering, the isolation, quarantine of everything it did, which if this guy was so scared of the Red Death, why would he bring people from the village where there was known cases of the plague or the Red Death and bring him into his palace?
Right.
That makes no sense to
me. Right. Well, like I said, in the original story, the weird, the commoner to princess subplot is not there at all. I don't know. I don't understand. I guess they bring it in there to kind of show you, an easy introduction as to like, okay, you're the new person. We're going to introduce everything to you. Basically, we're introducing the audience to that through this person, I think is what they were aiming for.
Right. But as we discussed too, is, the introduction of something that's there. Then we have this other subplot from Hop Frog, right? Which was a completely separate story of Poe's, and they kind of intermingled it into this, where you have a jester who is, how do you want to describe him?
Funny guy.
Funny guy, yeah. So the jester is, he has a girlfriend that's a dancer or that he likes, and he's being tortured by this other nobleman that is invited to this party. And convince them to dress up as an ape, a great ape. In the story, they're orangutans, right? And he got like 8 of them to do it, and then tie them up, as a joke, and then kind of lit them on fire to escape. Do you feel like with all the noblemen that were there, they could have gotten more of the closer to the number of the king obviously as a king in the story versus the prince, to have the 8 great apes, or how do you think that fit into that? Do you think it was a weird subplot? Do you think it kind of melded nicely into it?
I mean, it was fine. I mean, there was the big focus on the masquerade ball, and that was kind of the reason why he dressed up as the ape, because he wanted to do something fun and interesting for the masquerade. So I mean, I guess it kind of fit in there. I mean, it was kind of odd that he just murdered a noble person in front of all the other noble people, and they were just fine with it.
They're all just laughing at him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you should realize that one of you is probably going to be next, and you probably shouldn't be taking so much pleasure in this. But
right, and I mean, in fairness, I can't imagine that story fitting into a whole movie. So
no.
Maybe they were just trying to grasp at anything that they pull into it, and it's both about noblemen, right, or princes, or kings, and so it does kind of tie into it, but it just seems out of place.
A little bit, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it seems like almost kind of like a weird little comedic element in the middle of like a weird Satan story.
Right. Now, something that's coming that came to mind when we talk about the 7 rooms. Do you think this could be the 7 circles of hell that they descend to? Each room representing the next layer.
It's possible. I mean, yeah, I don't think they really went into if there was the different feeling or different things happening in each room. It was just a different color,
right?
And they had different themes in the room.
Yeah, but I know the prince, Vincent Price's character, was following him because he's like, oh look, it's my friend Satan. I'm going to follow him. Hey, everyone, there's Satan. I'm going to come say hi, right?
Right.
I mean, so we're approaching towards the end of this era. How do you feel overall the movie was? I know when I got the DVD, I had a hard time staying awake during this movie originally when I first watched it, and quite honestly, I had the same hard time this time as well.
No, I mean, I liked it. It kept me interested. It was fun enough. Seeing everybody in their hose and puffy pants and all that stuff, but. It was no, I thought it was good. I thought it was a good performance. I mean, it kept me interested. I wasn't falling asleep. I enjoyed it.
Okay,
thought it was good.
So I don't know what it was. I'm like, oh man, like this to me, this is the weakest thing for Vince Price that I've seen. I really enjoy it. I don't know why. I can't explain why. It's just I really don't
know. That's fair. You can make whatever judgment you wish. And I think this next one, I don't think either one of us watched.
No.
That was The Tomb of Ligeia. Ligeia. I don't know how to say it. But yeah. Came out in 1964. I know I didn't watch it. I believe you just mentioned that you didn't watch it either.
Correct. It was one of the last things I had to kind of watch, and it just time frame was I was not able to do it. But it's about another black cat.
Yeah, surprise,
right? Which this also stars Vincent Price,
right?
And you read the story, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we can discuss the story at least. We'll have to go back. So the Midnight Movies double feature pack. It was An Evening of Edgar Allan Poe and The Tomb of Ligeia, however you want to say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I said, let's go through this. We can go through the story real fast. So, essentially, what happens is Vincent Price's wife dies, right? And so he remarries, and his dead wife essentially is coming back for kind of revenge, or kind of trying to stop that marriage from happening. So that's, close to what the story's about.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's that's a good synopsis.
Once again, we're just kind of into the whole revenge after death, spirits unrest type scenario again. Which, like I said, is a very common thing of Poe, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a theme that comes up over and over again in his stories.
Now, how did you feel about the story as a whole, though?
Um, I mean, it's not one of my favorites. I mean, it's just it was just kind of a again, it's a story that's been done. Even before this time, even before his time, it had been done. Of just a marriage and a wife of being upset and trying to stop it from happening. I don't know. It just never really did anything special for me. I liked a lot of his other stories better. This one was
Which,
definitely at the bottom of the pile.
right. But I mean, it also introduces something we didn't really discuss: is hallucinations. Opium played a huge thing in a lot of these stories too. At least in
Mm-hmm.
the stories, not really discussed in the movies, but opium. There's a lot of is this reality? Is this hallucination? And most of these stories, in most of the movies too, especially the ones that we're discussing, a little bit here in the Black Cat, where there's a lot of hallucinations of people not knowing, if it's real or not. Kind of like something that's not on here that we discussed is like the telltale heart, right? I think we
Mm-hmm.
all know it because we know the last words of it from my generation, probably because of The Simpsons again, release of Barry's Someone's project that's about the telltale heart. And, he, in that story, he's the only one able to hear the beating heart of man with the evil eye, as he called it. He stalked for like a week to determine his sleeping patterns to kill and then bury. Which sounds very familiar, like another story, right?
Right.
So, and it's just I think the I don't want to say the terror, horror, suspense from the story stems from especially in those days where people died young, and do you remarry? Do you not when you're 30 now? Vincent Price is 40s and 50s in these movies, but still, it's a very common thing of the remarriages, right? Or marrying for wealth, like uh, like we had in the facts in the case of, right? That necessarily marrying for wealth and older people. So I think it's an okay story where the wife comes back and then essentially possesses the new bride or transforms into the new bride and kind of takes over the body.
Yeah, it also goes back to that Morella story, the very first story of
Right.
um, the Tales of Terror, which is the same kind of thing, to where the ghost. Well, it wasn't a wife and new wife thing. It was a mother and daughter thing,
Right.
but same basic story.
Right. I mean, so I don't know about you, but I know going through and kind of read the entire Poe book again, which I haven't done in a very long time, is just reading it that fast within this past week, you start to see the similarities across everything, I feel.
Yep. No, yeah, you definitely do. And that's unfortunately, whenever you read like a short story, like anthology from any author, you're gonna be like, Jesus, this guy talking about the same thing again. Because it'll be like the same story told multiple different ways.
Right.
But I guess that's all part of the writing process. That's why you write short stories, is you see what works and what doesn't. Kind of go from
Right.
there. I don't know if you've ever read any Philip K. Dick short stories.
It's been a very long time.
But almost all of them are about drugs, and there's like so many of them are about these same drugs. There's like weird competing hallucinogenic drugs in the future, and like he's got entire collections, like multiple collections, just talking about these drugs. That's it.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, very similar to, well, I mean, obviously I don't think Poe is that bad, but very they have plots or ideas that they kind of go over again and again and again and again, trying to like find that magic version of the story that they really like, but they so just keep telling it different ways until it fits into a mold that they're trying to fit it in.
Right. Now, do you think a lot of this is because opium was a big thing, burying alive was a big thing, spirits, still in that phase of before modern medicine, everything about it, stuff like that. A lot of superstitions still running rampant in this time frame. That this is kind of the audience that was expecting it. That's worked really well to the common person at that time.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely a product of his time. I mean, that's if you want to be a successful horror writer or or filmmaker, whatever it is, you got to play off of the fears of people. I mean, you got to play off the fears of your present day people if you want to actually make a name for yourself or be famous.
Right. And that's why in the 50s and 60s we had all the atomic age sci-fi movies, because atomic war was a big thing that people had on their minds at all times, right? Very interesting stuff. I think for a work of their time, it works. And not necessarily. We'll discuss that a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, it does. It just has to be twisted in certain ways, but I mean, it can be done. But yeah, we'll discuss that later
time.
Right. And then just another side note here. There's another movie that's sometimes put into that post cycle just because it was made by Corman. I think a lot of the same team around the same time. And that is The Terror. It came out in 1963. It has nothing to do with Poe or Lovecraft. It just came out around the same time, so people kind of throw it into that same, what they call the Poe cycle. So there's really only 8 movies in it, but sometimes they say 9 because they count this one, but this one doesn't actually.
Which this one also has Jack Nicholson in it.
Oh, yeah.
So as we're using the same cast, like, hey, I have the cast, I have the set. Why not make a movie type of deal?
Right? Yeah, that's probably what it was. Somebody threw him a script and said, hey, make this real fast. He's like, all right.
Right.
So, I mean, okay. Are we ready to...
Yeah, we can go into your Black Cat. I'm saying overall, being a little over 120 years after Poe wrote this stuff, I mean, it was an interesting thing that worked really well that I don't think would have worked in the silent era of movies, but was different enough from the atomic age sci-fi B horror, right? So it was interesting that it took that long into movie making to get to where we're at. But yeah, as your experiment of Black Cat is, there's been a lot of versions of the story.
yeah, and that's why I'm calling it experiments in adaptation, and this one is going to focus on the Black Cat. And I wanted to do this simply because I was looking at a lot of these adaptations, and this one in particular struck me as interesting because I was looking at all the different versions that they've made and all the names attached to it, and all of the basically the time frame that it's been done in. There's a lot of just interesting, ways that this has been done, and I just kind of wanted to, just go over the original short story and then go over all the different, variations and how they are different from the original story.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the original story. The Black Cat is fairly simple. There's an alcoholic guy who has a cat who's like his best buddy. He gets really drunk. The cat, kind of like blows him off, and he gets really angry, and he cuts the cat's eye out. Right.
Yep.
And shockingly, the cat now wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Right. Shocked. Right.
Yeah.
Can't imagine why. So of course he's drunk again, and he's trying to like cuddle with the cat. The cat runs away from him, gets angry, grabs the cat, ties it up in a noose, and hangs it from a tree. Right. That'll show that cat. Right. So the cat dies. In the process of the cat dying, his house burns down.
Right.
Okay. Now his house burns down. And then in the ruins of the house, they see this like burned in kind of etching picture of the cat being strung up in the tree in the ruins of the house. Okay. And then later on, another cat comes around. It's the same exact cat, only this one has like a white spot on his chest. Right. And like the longer the cat's around, because, of course the cat still doesn't like him. The longer the cat's around, he keeps seeing images and this white spot on his chest. And then eventually he sees like the gallows. This white spot is changed into the gallows. So he's like, oh, this cat's threatening me. So he goes to kill the cat again with an axe this time.
Yep.
His wife tries to stop him, gets in the way. He kills the wife.
Actually,
so in order to, yeah. So in order to try to hide this, he brings her down to the basement. In typical Poe fashion, he does this in a lot of his other stories. Bricks her up in the wall, right? So he bricks her over in the wall. Okay, nobody will ever find her. Case closed. So later on, the cops come by because they're looking for his wife because, she hasn't been seen. And he's like, oh, yeah, take a look around the house. She's not here. And then when they're in the basement, he's, go by the wall. And then all of a sudden, You hear the meow. You hear this meow in the wall. So the cops are like, "Oh, what's in there?" So of course they tear down the wall. They see the wife, and the cat was in there the whole time. Right. So the cat betrayed him again in the end. Okay, that's the basic story. Yep. Now we're gonna see. I did 5 different adaptations here, and we'll just kind of go over where they differ. There were more than this. This wasn't all of them. There were more, but I tried to limit it to these 5 because I thought these were the most interesting. There is a 1934 film called The Black Cat, and it says, as suggested by Edgar Allan Poe in the very beginning of it, and I guess that's an apt title because it does star Boris Karloff, it does star Bela Lugosi, so big horror names at the time. But literally the only thing it has in common is there is a black cat involved. That is it. There is literally nothing else similar about it. There's nobody that's drunk and hurting a cat. Nobody gets walled up in the wall. Nothing. There's no similarities at all. There is these bizarre scenes of like when Bela Lugosi's character sees the cat, he like has these like weird panic attacks where he has to like murder the cat. Huh. It's bizarre. Like the first time he sees the cat, he like puts his hands over his face, like, "Oh my god!" And he, of course, the bad guy is Boris Karloff, right? And he's got this just like collection of knives on his desk because why not? So he picks up this knife, throws it at the cat, kills the cat, and no one reacts. No one cares at all that this cat. Obviously the cat's a pet, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be in this house. And he just throws the knife at the cat, murders the cat. Everybody's like, "Oh well, cat's dead."
Yeah,
but that's it. That's it. And then the cat like shows up later on, and he does like the hands over the face, one thing, and that's it. There's literally no other similarities.
So it's just a way to get Karloff and Lugosi in the same movie.
Correct. Right. They did put Karloff in a very weird looking outfit. Like I don't even know what that outfit is. He looks like like a German art student, but it's like 1934. So it's like before that, cliche is out. I don't know. It's weird. It's a cross between like a kimono and a robe. And he's got like this weird pointy haircut. It's bizarre. That's the only thing. Yeah. It's the only thing interesting. There's interesting things because the Boris Karloff's character is like a serial killer who like keeps the women he kills in like cases in his like glass cases, like collector's edition cases in his basement. Though that I thought was kind of interesting, but yeah, nothing to do.
Very much like the last season of Dexter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was exactly like that. He had a bunch of just women down there. And I think that was the whole point of the story is like Bela Lugosi was like a prisoner. It was originally a fort. This weird architect guy, Boris Karloff is the weird architect guy. He like made his house into this old war fort. And I guess Bela Lugosi was like a prisoner in this war fort, and Karloff was like the commanding officer. So like after years, he comes back to this fort, I think looking for his wife. And of course, Boris Karloff is like, "Oh, your wife's been dead for a long time." And he brings him to a case, and he's like, "See, look, here's your wife in this glass case." It's bizarre.
Huh.
And then he's like, "So what happened to my daughter?" He's like, "Oh, your daughter's dead too." But he's like, "Well, I didn't put her in a case." And then like later on, you find out that like he's actually married to his daughter, and he's like hiding her. And it's weird. It's bizarre. Wow. Yeah, it's a weird movie. The movie itself is not bad, but as far as a adaptation of The Black Cat, it's an F. It's a way off fail. But the movie itself is interesting.
So it was inspired by the events that of someone reading the story of the Black Cat and then retelling it to someone else, and then writing the script on it.
Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention about our Poe cycle. The screenplays were written by Richard Matheson. You know who Richard Matheson is?
No.
The guy who wrote I Am Legend.
Oh, so The Last Man with our boy Vincent Price.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like almost all of them. Well, I don't know if all of them were, but all the ones that I watched all the screenplays were done by Richard Matheson. I thought that was just an interesting side note.
Huh. That's interesting.
Okay. Well, yeah. So we're going into one of those now. With the second adaptation would be the 1962 Tales of Terror, which we already discussed a little bit. And as far as an adaptation of The Black Cat, I think I discussed it before. The really, it is closer than the 1934 version. I will give it that. There is an alcoholic. He does not like his cat. His wife has the cat. He does not like the cat. He yells at the cat whenever he sees it. But then the cat kind of leaves the story, and then we enter into the Cask of Amontillado story. And then the cat comes back at the very end, because the Cask of Amontillado and the Black Cat share that same ending where somebody gets bricked up in the wall.
Right.
So at the end of that story, it's like they both get bricked up in the wall. So the guy that originally gets bricked up in the Cask of Amontillado story and his wife from the Black Cat story both get bricked up into the wall. The Black Cat hides in the wall. Cops come over. Cat meows. They tear down the wall. They catch him because they're both in there.
Right, and the love interest is Vincent Price. That's
correct.
How they shoehorn him into this Tales of Terror.
Right. Yes. Vincent Price is the guy that's wooing his wife, right. Peter Lorre's wife.
Yeah.
I mean, it's closer than the 1934 version because at least it has some real elements of that story in there. But as far as most of the story, it basically cuts out the entire middle. It has the very beginning and it has the very end, and that's it. Right. Yeah. But I wouldn't give it an F. I'd give it, as far as an adaptation of the Black Cat, I'd give it a D. As far as overall, it was good. I liked the story, but as far as a Black Cat adaptation, we'll give it a D. Right. I'll move on to the 1966 version, which was very hard to find. It's a black and white, not well filmed version. The acting is horrible. I will say the guy, the main dude in the story is pretty good. But the woman who plays his wife is just bad. She is terrible. I mean, almost unbearable to watch. But as far as the story itself, as far as adaptation goes, I will give it an A. It is extremely close. They follow every point in the story. Every major beat in the story they do follow. Only it's in like the modern, rock and roll era of 1966. So as all movies of that time, that are set in that time period. Of course, he's in a bar and there's a live band playing and they're playing rock and roll music and there's kids dancing and, women in fringe dresses shaking their ass in the camera kind of stuff. That's just
like the era of the beach party where everyone had
right.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like all those movies in the 60s all had those scenes. Yep. Every single movie did, no matter what movie it was. There was there. And so, there was like, they were playing rock and roll, songs. They played like a Chuck Berry song and like a Bo Diddley song.
Wow.
So like it was when he was getting drunk as an alcoholic, because they stayed very close to the original story. He would be in this bar watching the kids dance and shit. And then he got up and danced for a little while too. It's interesting.
So it brought the story from the early, like 1825-ish, 1830-ish into the modern era.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was the same thing. Like he had this cat and he loved the cat. It was kind of bizarrely how much he loved the cat. Like he was like loved the cat more than he loved his wife. Like he was hanging out with the cat and playing with the cat, and the wife was getting like jealous of how much time he was spending with the cat. It was weird. So anyway, he gets really drunk. The cat kind of blows him off and he cuts the cat's eye out, just like the original story does. The cat kind of, blows him off like that. And again, same thing happens. Only then he hangs it up in a tree. Only this time they kind of explain why the house burns down. Is he hangs the cat with an electrical cord, and then he electrifies it when the cat's in the tree, and that's what lights the house on fire. They did not talk about the image burned into the house, but I mean that is a minor point. And then the same thing is the cat comes back. He goes to kind of kill the cat with an axe. His wife gets in the way. He kills the wife with an axe to the head, exactly as the story. Walls are up in the wall, exactly as in the story. Cops come. Cat meows from the wall, break down the wall, dead wife, and the cat. But very, very close. Like I said, as far as quality of the movie, not good quality. Very, very bad. Like I said, the acting of the wife alone is enough to just turn it off. It's just terrible. The guy does a pretty good job, though. There's a weird scene where he goes into, like after he kills the cat and the house burns down, there's like this weird scene where he finds out he has no insurance. And so he like has a breakdown because he can't pay for a new house. And then they lock him in a mental hospital, right? And there's this long extended scene of him like rolling around on this bed while being held down, like they're injecting him with stuff and he's like screaming and moaning.
Yeah.
And then it immediately cuts to him being like clean cut and healed, like immediately. There's no in between. There's no montage of healing. It's just moaning, screaming out of bed, cut to clean cut, all clean, talking to the doctor. And the doctor says, yeah, you can go home. Like it was a weird cutoff there, but that was fun. And then the very end of the story, after the cops catch him, find the wife behind the wall, he runs out the door, jumps in his car, and there's a car chase with like rock and roll music playing really loud again. But other than that, it's a very faithful,
interesting
rendition of the story. Yeah, but it's worth watching if you want to watch Black Cat stories. It's worth watching for that reason alone. But it's better left to history, I would say.
I'm just going over the credits. This movie is like the people's only movie. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely they should not have made another movie. There's nobody in here I would say deserves to keep working in the industry because they're all bad.
Right.
But again, whoever made it, whoever wrote it and directed it, stayed extremely faithful to the story. So he must have been a big Poe fan. But yeah,
interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we'll move on to the next one. The next one is 1981. Lucio Fulci, the great Italian horror filmmaker Lucio Fulci. This one is interesting and bizarre. This one also took me a while to watch because it's in Italian originally.
Right.
And most of the versions I found that were in Italian didn't have subtitles, or I think there's a dubbed version floating around somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I know you were helping me with that, but we eventually got it. We eventually watched it. Now, in this movie, interestingly enough, the cat is the antagonist. The cat is the bad guy. The cat is literally going around and murdering people. Yeah. Like there's this weird thing. Of course, it's a weird Italian movie, so there's going to be weird, goofy sex scenes in it. Where like this young couple like locks themselves in like a pool house, like refrigerator box. I don't even know how to describe it. It doesn't make any sense. But they're like, yeah, there's a cot in here. We're gonna get it on in this thing, right? So they're getting it on, and then they figure out, oh, the key is gone because there's only one key to get in, and if you don't have the key, you can't get out either. So they're trapped in there, and and the cat snuck in through the grates, stole the key, and then got out. I mean, why they couldn't breathe through the grate that has a hole in it, I don't know. They didn't talk about that. But the cat stole the key, so they couldn't get out. They all like suffocated in there, right? Yeah. So that's just one of the ways they killed them. There's one where there's this guy is walking home drunk from a bar, and the cat like pushes him off this. He's in a construction site for some reason, and it pushes him off of this like walkway he's on, and he falls on a bunch of rebar and dies. There's a bunch of like just cats hypnotizing people and making them like walk into traffic. I mean, there's a lot of bizarre things, but the cat is the bad guy the whole time. And then there's this old guy who's got like these supernatural ghost powers. Like he can like record people, like ask, gravestones and ghosts questions, and then he can record them and get their answers somehow.
So EVPs.
Right. Okay. But he also has like the ability to he also has psychometry. Like he can touch things and know, things about the people that owned it and stuff like that. So the guy's just got like magic supernatural powers. They don't explain it. He just has it.
Okay.
So as the story goes on, they kind of like insinuate that he's the one controlling the cat, because he has these magic ghost powers that he can make the cat do this stuff. But then as the story goes further along, you find out, no, it's just the cat. The cat's just evil the whole time. The cat was controlling him.
So the cat was
cat's evil.
The cat was almost like a familiar, and playing into the whole supernatural, suspicious of black cats and their powers and being familiars for wizards, witches. Sounds like
right.
Okay.
Kind of, yeah. But they were playing into that. It does keep some of the original elements of the story. He does eventually, when he finds out, oh, this cat is killing people that he's not supposed to be killing, because it's kind of leave it ambiguous as to whether he wanted people to die or not. But obviously the cat was killing people that he didn't want to. So his, solution is to drug the cat to put it to sleep, hang the cat from the tree, and then bury it. Right. So he does the same thing where he hangs the cat and he buries it. His house does not burn down, but there is a weird drawing on the wall of the cat hanging in the tree. So like they kept that element of it to where he hangs the cat, the image of the cat being hanged shows up on the wall in the house, but the house doesn't burn down.
Right.
And then at the very end, there's this woman who like kind of figures out what he's up to and what he's doing, and she goes over to confront him. And the cat kills her. Well, both of them do. Like both of them help each other kill her. And then so to obviously hide the crime, he does brick her up in the basement, so he keeps that element as well. The cops come over later. Of course, the cat meows. They know that she's in there. They get her out.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, again, is it better than the 1934 version? Yes, it does have some elements of the original story in it, but they add so much wacky, goofy stuff in there that overall I would give the adaptation a C. But the movie itself, even though it's in Italian, it is worth watching because it's bizarre. And especially if you like cats and you like seeing cats murder people, you should watch it because
I mean, I don't like cats.
It's fun.
I'm so for that.
But it's fun.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the other one that I watched, this is the 5th out of the 5, is the 1990 movie Two Evil Eyes. Now this one I thought was interesting because there's two stories told in the same one. The first one is done by George A. Romero, and that's the case of Dr. Valdemar, your favorite story again.
Yep.
And that one stars Adrienne Barbeau.
Right.
She is the like an evil wife that's they're trying to steal all their husband's money, and then her like lover / doctor is the guy who puts him in the hypnotizes him, puts him in his trance, whatever it is. And then the other half of it is a Black Cat, retelling done by Dario Argento himself, starring Harvey Keitel and Mr. McDowell from Coming to America as the police detective. That's Harvey Keitel's friend because he's like a crime scene photographer.
He's
but he's
a beatnik, especially with that hat he wears the entire time.
Yeah. Every time he's in photographer mode, he puts on a little French beret, which is bizarre. And that one it does keep some of the elements of it. He is an alcoholic. He is a jerk, but it's more focused on like him being mean to his wife, more or less, and just being an abusive kind of jerk. And the cat is there, and he doesn't quite stab the cat's eye out, but he does kill the cat. They don't show how. They show him like being mean to the cat, and then just kind of cut to like, oh, the cat's dead. They just kind of suggest that it's dead.
It's because he put like his hands around his neck for the art book he was creating. So instead of hanging, he strangled it. And
right. Yeah. Right. But they don't actually show it hanging. They don't show him killing the cat or whatever. Yeah. It's just not there anymore.
Right.
So, of course, the wife is all distraught looking for the cat. And, he's like, oh, I don't know what happened to your cat. And so they're, like looking for the cat. And eventually, there's a bunch of weird, goofy stuff going on because it's an Argento movie, of course. But at the end, it is similar to where he, the wife is, trying to like leave him and escape. And he murders her with not an axe, but a butcher knife, I think, or like a cleaver.
A cleaver and then a saw.
Yeah. So yeah, and they do keep the element where he takes her body and he walls her up, not in the basement with bricks like in every other story, but like in his hallway with like just some drywall.
Plaster. Yeah, I mean, it's a very modern, newer take for 1990.
Right. Yeah. So he like puts some drywall in a bookcase in front of her, and then just leaves her there. And of course everybody's looking for the wife, and I don't know where she is. He tried to be all like elaborate with like he had like a mannequin in a car like waving to the neighbors to like, oh yeah, we went on vacation, you saw me, she was alive. And then, and then he like went on a fake vacation and then said, oh yeah, she went on tour for, music stuff. She's going to be gone for months, and I don't think anyone was fooled at all.
Not at all.
So they're all come over there, and then eventually they, the cops go over there. And they're just like in the story, they get close. There's a cat, or no, that is actually, they do the whole search of the house and then they leave. and then he comes back to get his autograph. And then the cat meows through the wall. Yeah. Oh, by the way. Yeah. So then the cat meows through the wall.
Yeah. Very, 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 very Mason-ish.
Right. Yeah. Oh, wait. I missed the part where the cat climbed out of the drywall and he had to cut it with a saw and kill it and then patch up the hole. Anyway, so the cat was supposedly dead again because, of course, it came back. Then they tear down the wall, and then her dead body is in there with like weird hairless kittens.
Yep.
That apparently the other black cat left behind, and these kittens ate her dead body.
Yeah.
So that Argento gets to have one of his, half destroyed bodies. And I mean, there's a lot of those because there's the crime scene photographer, so you get to have fun with all those bodies and stuff. But yeah, the one with the cats eating her guts was interesting and fun. So yeah, as far as an adaptation of the Black Cat, I give it again a C. I mean, or maybe a C plus. It kept a lot of the same elements in there, but again, it added so much weird, goofy stuff to it that is kind of beyond it. But the movie itself, I thought was pretty.
Now, did you notice the hints to the other Poe stories in that Black Cat story?
Well, yeah, the guy's name was Roderick Usher.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they said it only said Rod Usher, but if you look at the credits at the end, his full name was Roderick Usher. So yeah, he had that same name. And yeah, I'm sure there was more that I missed, but I did catch that one.
The woman was killed by a swinging pendulum in the first opening of the crime scene.
Yeah, the cut in half body.
And then the person that died at the person that was buried alive at the cemetery. That other crime scene.
Oh, yeah. I didn't catch it. I don't know if I caught that one.
That was just like another premature burial where, he seemed like it's just very quick glimpse. Seemed like he was dead. Wasn't dead. Came out, buried his wife alive, and then was killed while burying her, which is very premature burial. So I think Argento did better of the two parts of incorporating other Poe elements into it. And with the first part, with it being George Romero, the best he got was the essentially sloshy zombie of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a typical George Romero, but I mean, it was interesting. It was a fun version of the story, at least.
I mean, arguably, some of the two, great horror people, right? Made two Poe.
Right. Yeah, like I said, I had never heard of it, which I was like, that kind of shocked me when I was looking through these adaptations. I was like, I definitely need to watch this, seeing how all these big name people are part of it, and I didn't even heard of it. So,
right, and I agree. Until you brought up, I didn't know that existed either until we you did that research. I'm just like, that's amazing. With two great horror directors, with Adriana, whatever her name is, with
Adrienne Barbeau,
who was in The Fog, a couple of things, and then Tom Atkins. Let's face it, Tom Atkins was an '80s icon of horror, right?
Yeah,
it's 1990, so it was made in the '80s.
Yeah, more or less. It's close enough to the '80s. Where it's a freebie.
Yeah. So I mean, do you feel like we've gotten any more other adaptations that are coming out that really haven't come out that you think could fit into here?
I mean, they definitely could. I mean, because again, the closest one is that 1966 version, and that was not done well. So, I mean, if you could just take that screenplay and just remake it with people that can actually act, I'm sure it would be much better than these other ones. I mean, and the other ones, don't get me wrong, they're not bad movies. I mean, they're a lot of them are good movies. They're just, as far as adaptations of the original story, I would say not good. But they're definitely great movies. Like I enjoyed all of them.
Now, do we want to talk? I don't think either of us seen it, but The Raven, right? John Cusack.
I did not watch it. I mean, I was interested. I remember the previews came out. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I like Poe. I like John Cusack. Let's see where this goes. And the reviews were so bad. I was like, nope.
Right.
And I never have bothered.
Yeah, just what it seemed like, it just seemed like John Cusack was Poe, and then there was copycat killers, if you will, that were killing people based off of Poe's stories that he's brought in to like consult, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was an interesting take, but I'm not sure if that was a good way to reintroduce us to Poe. It has been a good number of years since we had adaptations, it feels like.
Right. Like I said, on paper it sounded good, but I mean the reviews were so bad. I'm like, no,
Right.
not gonna bother. Yeah, and the only other movie that I watched that wasn't in those other groups was Murder in the Rue Morgue. It's a 1984 Bela Lugosi. Have you seen this movie? Do you know of this movie?
No.
Okay. Murder in the Rue Morgue is it's not like a morgue as if I originally thought of it. Rue Morgue is like a street name in France, apparently.
Okay.
I didn't know that until I was reading the story and trying to figure it out. So it just means murder on a street or on the name of a street. Now
Right.
this is, as far as what the original story is way off. The original story is interesting because it's more like, it's just like a weird detective story.
Right.
It's like one of those locked door mysteries, where there's like people dead in a room. The door was locked from the inside and nobody knows how they died and how the killer got out.
Okay.
Okay. And then the killer, and of course, in a lot of these stories with the detectives, they go in weird directions. The killer ends up being an orangutan that snuck into a window, and and stuffed the one lady into a chimney and then threw the other lady out a window. And that was the story. And this, the detective in the story was kind of Sherlock Holmes-esque, because I think that was when the story was written. I believe it was before Sherlock Holmes, or at least around the same time.
1840s. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, he basically was like, going through his like logical, figuring out the clues of the scene. And then he basically figured out that it was a monkey that did this, and then they found the sailor who had a monkey and he's like, oh yeah, that was a monkey. And so it was all thing. Now the movie itself is, Bela Lugosi is in it. He's the big star, because Bela Lugosi, they I guess couldn't figure out how to fit him in that story. So they made up a whole new version where Bela Lugosi is this mad scientist. And he, I guess, is like his side hustle is working at a sideshow, like a circus sideshow. And he's got like this monkey. Now, and then the monkey goes from like, when they do close-ups of it, it's like an actual chimp in a cage.
Yeah.
And then when they pull out, it's a guy in a suit. So, and they're very obviously different, but at least they tried. And so he's like, but goes in this weird spiel of like, hey, look at this monkey. He's a monkey. Everybody's like, oh, scared, because it's, whatever old timey days. And they're scared of monkeys because they didn't have zoos with monkeys in them back then.
Right.
And then he's got this bizarre, weird unibrow. It's like super thick and furry. Not the monkey, Bela Lugosi does, and it's just weird looking. But anyway, so his whole thing is he's like having the monkey kidnap prostitutes, and then he's bringing them into his like secret lair, and he's trying to inject them with monkey blood. I don't know what he's trying to do with this monkey blood. I don't know if he's trying to make like a super soldier thing or something. I don't know. They don't really explain that, but that's what he's doing. And I mean, it ends up to where his monkey sidekick does end up shoving the lady's mom into a chimney. So that at least does happen. But like the whole rest of that story is just, it's all just made up. I don't know if Bela Lugosi came in and was like, I got a great idea. I'm going to be a mad scientist. And they're like, well, there's no mad scientist in the story. Make it happen.
I'm looking.
I'm gonna have a unibrow.
I'm looking at this artwork and it looks familiar. Like especially the movie poster with the unibrow. Yeah, I mean it looks familiar. Maybe I watched it at some point. I don't feel like I did though.
Right. Like I said, I was just kind of looking through it. I'm like, hey, Bela Lugosi's in it. I'll watch that one. And yeah, it's a bizarre change of the story. But yeah, the original story was not like a horror Poe-esque story. It was more of like, it was more like a mystery.
Okay.
And then they made it, they added this mad scientist to add a darker element to it. I think, I don't know, whatever. As far as adaptation goes, it was not great, but it's worth seeing Bela Lugosi in a weird unibrow.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
Right. And that's all the Poe movies that I watched or know of or can expound on.
Right.
Do you have any other ones you want to add to the list?
No, I don't think so right now. I mean, obviously, if we want to discuss like future remakes and stuff like that, we can. Obviously, there's TV shows, there's radio broadcasts, there's the well of stuff is there. But obviously, we focus on like what we consider the quintessential first
Right.
of these things, right?
Right. We have to narrow it down, or else we'll be talking all day. So okay. So that we'll just roll on into to Lovecraft based movies.
Yes.
And probably I would say arguably the most famous of those would be Reanimator.
Oh, absolutely.
You agree?
By far. Reanimator. I that's probably the first one I ever saw. I don't know if I ever recall. Like I said, it being H.P. Lovecraft, never really thought much of it from that time until later than late 90s, early 2000s, or I ran across other items. But I mean, Reanimator is I would consider a fantastic movie. I love Herbert West. I love what's his name, the main guy.
Yeah, the actor.
Yeah, the actor.
Jeffrey Toombs,
Jeffrey
I think his name.
Jeffrey Combs.
Combs.
Yeah,
there we go.
You know, obviously he's in like the 4400, and he became a very mainstay actor in horror. I'd say for a little bit, especially the 80s.
Yeah, he's been around.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could almost call Reanimator a modern day Frankenstein, except more zombie than Frankenstein, right? Would you agree with me?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. The original story. I mean, the original Frankenstein story. Frankenstein was just a normal. It was a guy. You know. Right. I mean, he was a very intelligent guy, but he was just a guy. He had normal human intelligence. Yeah, he looked freaky, right? Because he was, stitched together from body parts, but he had normal intelligence. Now, and yeah, Reanimator, when they're brought back, it kind of seems like it depends on how long they've been dead.
Right.
But even like right after they died, they seem to come back with like a more basic animalistic version of themselves.
Right. So, like I said, it's very, very, very zombie-like. Because he's able to reanimate just a head.
Right.
Which, obviously we have some good old 50s and 60s B-horror movies with, the head in the pan, the head that would die, or the screaming skull, or stuff like that.
Yeah, there was the brain that wouldn't die, or the head that wouldn't die, or something.
That's
like
the thing.
Yeah.
If you watch the MS3K of it, it's titled one thing, and then they change it. It's like the title in the movie. But would you say, this is based off of Lovecraft, which is almost 100 years, let's say 80 years after Poe, right? So kind of we consider the next father of horror. Do you think this is kind of like kind of like the first idea of, like I said, I want to call them zombies, like the first example of that type of reanimation being a zombie? Because at that point in time, zombie wasn't a person that was dead that was brought back to life, right?
Right. Yeah, I think. Yeah, at that time, I mean, you're talking. You had like voodoo zombies.
Right. And that was
but
white zombie. It was a very classic zombie at that point in time.
Right. But yeah, they're not actually dead. They're like put in a trance, like controlled, kind of zombie. Right.
And we consider George Romero to be the godfather of the modern zombie, but I mean, I would argue that Reanimator, because it was written decades before that, would be maybe our first example of that type of zombie, or the reanimation of a corpse in that fashion. Yeah,
a reanimation as the just not being a normal person, as being something else, more animalistic, something else, right?
Well, because like I said, it's because you're able to just have a head. Zombies can be torn apart and still live. Well, I don't think the monster would survive that. So,
right.
Yeah, and I know, like I said, I remember, I couldn't tell you the first time I watched Reanimator, but I know I definitely, maybe it was on Monster Vision or late, at the drive-in with Billy Bob or something like that. Um, but when do you think you were first introduced to works of Lovecraft?
Okay. Well, yeah. The funny thing is that I thought I watched Reanimator for many years, many years.
Okay.
And that was because of the second movie that's on the list here. Is made by like the same director, the same like team. It's the same cast. I mean, Jeffrey Combs is the main character in it. It's the same woman that I think played the girlfriend in the movie. I mean, it's like the same cast, same everything, based on H.P. Lovecraft. I assumed it was the same movie. I guess I was wrong. From Beyond was the one that I watched. Now, for years, I thought that was Reanimator because whenever I saw like stills or whatever from the show, it always showed Jeffrey Combs. They always mentioned Lovecraft. I'm like, yeah, okay, I've seen that movie. I know what you're talking about. I guess I just didn't catch the thing. So I've obviously seen bits and pieces of Reanimator. It's kind of hard to miss if you're watching horror as a horror fan, right? It's everywhere, but I didn't watch it all the way through until like a month ago. Because I had assumed that I had seen it all the time, but we were watching that documentary, the In Search of Darkness documentary, and they were showing scenes from that movie, and I'm like, wow, I don't remember that at all. And then they also showed scenes from Beyond, and I'm like, hey, that's Reanimator, right? Because I guess I assumed it was. So I had seen From Beyond as a young lad. I mean, we're talking, I don't know. This was pre-high school, so I don't know how young I was, but I had seen From Beyond, and I assumed it was Reanimator like my whole life, but it wasn't. So now I've seen both, but I assumed so Reanimator I've only seen all the way through very recently.
Right.
But From Beyond I saw a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, both of these movies, I'd say a lot of Lovecraft stuff is body horror, right? Especially obviously Reanimator, zombies, From Beyond, the creature, the amalgamation that comes out at the end, right?
Right, yeah.
And I know Reanimator, like, there is Evil Dead or Army of Darkness versus Reanimator comics, which I'm staring at right now. That with Ash from Evil Dead, because I clearly obsessed with Evil Dead. I know. I mean, in theory, it's a Deadite, right?
Yeah, in the basic terms, sure.
Terms, right. So, they're great body horror. I think, like I said, there's Bride of Reanimator, which is then leaning more into the whole Frankenstein thing because we get Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, right?
The sequels I have not watched, so you're going to be the expert on the sequels. The original I have watched.
I have not watched them in a very, very, very long time. I'll have to go back and watch those. I think that's kind of I think we can talk more about these in the body horror episode because we have very fond opinions of some of those movies in that category, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, I don't feel like we've had a lot of Lovecraft movies. Like we had that little surge in the 80s, and kind of one that we can talk about next is The Curse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's specify the 1987 Curse with Will Wheaton.
Right.
And I don't feel like I ever recall that. Seen it. I know there's been 4 of them. Only 3 of them are related. And that's something that I watched this week was I'm like, how did I miss The Curse?
Yeah, I mean, obviously back then I would not have known who Will Wheaton was. I didn't know who he was until that Star Trek came out. That was way later though. That was in the 90s. So yeah, no, I had never seen it either. I mean, I only seen it because I was researching, Lovecraft movies, and I saw one with Will Wheaton. I'm like, what? So I watched it. Yeah, but yeah, I didn't know about it either. But I mean, I thought it was great. Well, other than the ending, I think the ending is not good. The ending, I think, is like the ending of a different story that they like tacked on. But I think it followed the original story, or at least the original idea of the story, pretty closely up until about the last 15 minutes, and then it just went off the rails.
Yeah, and we could kind of talk about if you can call it a remake, or I'm going to call it remake. That's part of the remake, reboot, revival discussion later on. These episodes is The Color Out of Space, right? Which is based off of that story with Nick Cage, Tommy Chong. Can't remember anyone else's name that's in there. And I know the director of Color Out of Space is a director that you really enjoy,
Richard Stanley.
Right. Now, we watched Color of Space when it came out, right, a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think the two compare? Do you think both are good adaptations of the story itself, which is, something we really discussed? Lovecraft is very poetic, and a lot of his stuff very like sensory type things. I'm not sure necessarily as body horror as we get, but I mean, you can definitely put body horror in both of these categories, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the curse, obviously, the mom, she, quite honestly, I was watching it, like, she first looked like she turned into a witch, and then she turned into a deadite, as far as my visual representation of it goes. And
yeah, no, that's fair.
And just, boils essentially on people.
Yeah, a lot of boils. There's a boils on everybody,
right? And then and I don't recall. I was watching it, and the oldest son or farmhand, he just kind of disappeared, right?
Yeah, he just went away. I was thinking that too. The weird guy with the hair on his shoulders. Yeah, he just like poof, gone. I mean, I think he was only there to forward the mom is an adulteress subplot,
right?
And then after that, he had no more use, so he was gone.
Right. Which, the idea was, I don't know why they didn't call it Color Out of Space. I know why they call it The Curse is because the stepdad, very, very religious, right? And he blamed that the curse on the crops was all because of the wife being an adulterer, sleeping with her stepson. I'm assuming stepson, farmhand. They never explain it.
I was trying to figure out. I was like thinking about it the whole time. I'm like trying to figure out this family dynamic.
Right.
Like it looks like I think Will Wheaton and the little girl were like they were real brother and sister from the mom, right. And they're like their previous dad either I think died. I think they mentioned that he died, and then I think that the stepdad guy, the jerk Christian stepdad guy, and the fat son. I think that was his real son. I don't think that was her son. But I think the other guy was just like a farmhand because he was like sleeping out in a barn.
Right. But he was also eating breakfast with them, but we never see him again. So
right. Yeah, he just like I said, after that happened, I'm assuming he fired him, as soon as he found out about the adultery thing, but they didn't show that and they didn't say anything. Like no one ever mentioned him ever again. He just poof gone.
Right. And I thought for a while there, because I said seen the Color Out of Space first, that he might have been the Tommy Chong character.
Okay, yeah.
Like the guy who's kind of on the farmland, but really wasn't. That was because, the water came from the well, and the well was a big part of the Color Out of Space with Nick Cage. And, and he was able, and Tommy Chong's character was able to see what's going on. It was also part of that well. And, both being focused on that, I thought maybe it'd be correlated, but now in spoilers for the Color of Space, not no one survives except the TVA as they had him in the A's one, the water guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Entire family dies.
Right, and they never explained why that water guy came back.
No.
Like the doctor guy, I understand why he came back because that was like a shining moment, I think. Right? Is like the guy was like that. This whole subplot of the guy like testing the water and bringing it to the lab, and the lab tells him, "Oh, it's got some horrible things in it. You need to, get all the people away from this water immediately." So he goes there to warn everybody. He walks in the door and he gets hit in the back of the head with a hammer, and he's down and dead. And that's it. And then all of a sudden, that other guy comes in and saves the kids. It's like you could have just easily just combined that into one person. I don't understand why they needed two people. Maybe they really wanted a shining moment. Well, maybe that's what he was really going. They needed
a shining moment. They didn't want to kill one of the Duke boys. This is what it comes down to.
I guess so.
Jeez. I'm like, why does he look so familiar? And he's a Duke. I can tell which one, but I know he was the Duke. Now, going back to Color of Space, body horror. Richard Stanley, kind of known for that, right?
Yeah,
obviously,
definitely.
Hardware, you're one of your all-time favorites that you introduced me to. I'd never seen, never ran across it, and I think it's because it's before the time I was able to do it. Maybe the time I was going to the video store, it wasn't there anymore.
Well, it was. I think it was considered like a B movie at the time. I mean, it really wasn't, but I think it was considered a B movie at that time. So if you didn't really look at the racks when it came out, it probably got pushed to the back shelf pretty quick.
Yeah. That's entirely possible. But I mean, overall, I think they're both good movies. I wouldn't say that Will Wheaton was the star of The Curse because I don't think he was in it very much. I feel like when the Doctor or the Duke's Boys was in it more.
Right.
But overall, I mean, I think with Richard Stanley, taking what he did at Color of Space, and he said that he maybe got defunded for the rest of the stuff he wanted to do. He wanted to do one of the other movies that we're going to discuss is Dunwich Horror, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, but basically his funding got pulled because there's sexual assault allegations against him. So, if that happened, I mean, I don't know the story. I didn't look at the story, but basically as soon as that happened, the funding, the production company pulled his funding after that. I don't know. I mean, that nothing ever got solved. All I know is that at this moment in time, he filed a suit against the woman that made the allegations for libel or whatever. So obviously it's a still ongoing thing. I just know as of right now, the funding for it has been pulled. Until that stuff gets sorted out, it probably won't go anywhere. So we're probably talking couple of years before we figure out where that goes.
Right, but
that's the status of it right
and
now.
I think he seemed very keen on doing it. I think he did well. I'd love to see Dunwich Horror. I'd love to see the Innsmouth story and what he was able to do with that. I was hoping that was going to be a resurgence of Lovecraft.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, yeah, based on the Color Out of Space, he did a fantastic job on. I mean, very, very good adaptation and very well made. So yeah, I would have loved to see him make other H.P. Lovecraft stories, but yeah, as of right now, it's up in the air. So who knows if it'll happen?
All right, so talking Dunwich Horror,
1970.
Dunwich Horror.
Yes. Now, Dean Stockwell has some amazing sideburns in this movie. Let me just start it with that. I mean, he has fantastic sideburns and that mustache.
Oh yeah.
If that is not like one of the creepiest mustaches I've ever seen, just how weirdly like perfectly groomed it was.
Like is cut at a perfect angle upward.
Right. It's odd. It is off-putting. It is very strange.
He's supposed to be 25. He looks like he's 50. Let's face it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, it is the 70s.
Right.
Everybody looked older in the 70s, but still,
right.
Yeah, it's pushing it.
Right. So
but yeah, I know you have your issues with it. I liked it. I liked the weird psychedelic color flashes and stuff that were happening. I like the weird orgy stuff that was going on in the dream world and the weird like over sexuality, I want to say, of like the weird rituals that were going on.
Right. And I don't get me wrong, like I just had problems with the weird flashes of light. And for those listening, the story is essentially his great grandfather was killed or burned for reading from the Necronomicon, kind of tying back to the Necronomicon, yep. And he wanted to like study the book to see what was wrong. And he somehow, with his perfect mustache and sideburns, convinces one of the professor's light aides to go with him on this trip where everyone's weirdly just weird around him. Like gas was $1 to fill up the entire tank. Like they just didn't want anything to do with him and his family.
Right.
And so, he's trying to summon the old ones, right? If you want to call it Eldritch Terrors, the old ones, the Cthulhu and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
Very, very, very 70s-ish. I can tell you that they bought the rights to one song and one song only and just played it in different tones throughout the entire movie.
Okay, a lot of movies in the 70s did that. I mean, that was just a 70s thing. Have you ever seen any of the old like Bruce Lee movies? There is one which is the worst one. I mean, it's a great movie. Don't get me wrong. It's Return of the Dragon. It's the one where he's in Italy. Yeah. He's working at a Chinese restaurant in Italy. Anyway, there is a song. I wouldn't even call it a song. It's more like 5 notes. And they repeat those 5 notes. And depending on the emotion that they're going for, they play it slower. They play it louder. They play it more jaunty or slow it down. But it is literally the same 5 notes. It's not even an entire song. It's the same 5 notes. And they play it over and over and over again. It's bizarre. But I think that was just a 70s thing. Because that movie was also in there.
This movie gave me a lot of Manos, the Hands of Fate vibes. Like the Torgo song. Like if I say Torgo song, you know what song I'm talking about when he's walking
right.
Hands of Fate, and the character he kind of looked like Manos, the Hands of Fate in a way. The 70s perm, the stash, the sideburns. Everyone looks like they're ready for porno.
Right.
Oh, now the horror. Let's talk about the horror. And that's when the horror is when we got all the flashing, psychedelic, I'm on an acid trip vibe, right?
Right. Okay, it looks like a beholder.
Right. And that's what
it looks like. An eyeball in a mouth with a whole bunch of like snakes coming out of it. That's what it looked like.
I consider it hands. It looked like hands to me. Like a whole bunch of hands.
Well, the scene, the scene where the one girl, okay, like her friend went to the house looking for her, and she like threw the old man down and ran upstairs and like went in the evil monster room, and it like bizarrely tore all her clothes off somehow. But yeah, it looked like snake hands. Yeah. Like it looked like snakes. Right. And if you look at the cover art, they're also snakes.
And plot twist, that's the guy's twin. Right?
Yep.
So I can see, I definitely see a beholder from D&D in that, hands down, right? No pun intended. Mm-hmm. But that's I think hands. Do you see other movies very similar to this? Because watching this is the first time watching it, was this week. It seemed almost Basket Case-ish. Like, Basket Case.
I can see that.
Like the story of Basket Case, right? It's his conjoined twin, but it's still this creature that's a creature that's very handsy. And go from it. I don't necessarily like, the professor shouting the same word to him like 3 times made him engulf in fire and fall off the cliff at the end.
Well, he got hit by lightning.
Right.
That's what set him on fire. But yeah, I don't know what they were doing. They were like pointing fingers at each other saying I don't know
like
what
he kept saying words. He's like, stop saying that one word.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand. He's been doing this ritual for like hours at this point. And like somebody comes in and says one word and it like blows your whole thing out of proportion. Like, come on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a movie that could get done differently. Or now 52 years later.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement there. I'm just saying there was a lot of fun 1970 stuff. I mean, because it came out in 1970.
Right.
It was cool. I mean, as far as like differences from the story, there's a lot of huge differences in the story. Like in the movie, the guy with the perfect mustache and the sideburns is all like charming and has like weird hypnotic eyes or whatever. In the book, he's like a deformed like Igor type of dude.
Right. And his
like he's all like messed up looking. Everybody's like has to get away from him. Like, and he smells so bad he like scares people away.
Right, but here's
and then he tries to steal the book and he gets shot and killed, and the whole rest of the story happens without him.
I mean, we can say this is the first H.P. Lovecraft movie that has his name attached to it, because obviously we discussed the Poe one that was H.P. Lovecraft, but wasn't Poe. But we can say this is probably the first movie that we were able to find, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was other ones that were based on his stories. Like, there's another one that was based on Color Out of Space, is that Die Monster Die movie. that came out. I think it was in the '60s. And it's kind of the same thing, but it's got like a weird like rich guy in a mansion, somehow harvested the meteor and the weird color coming out of it. It's similar. I mean, it's based on the story, but it's not
Right.
great. But yeah, they didn't really like put his name up in lights, selling it as an HP Lovecraft story. I would say the Dunwich Horror is the first one that really did that I could find. I mean, there might be other ones out there, but that's the one that I found. Looked like it.
And then I think my first introduction, besides reading or not knowing it's H.P. Lovecraft, but knowing it's H.P. Lovecraft was Dagon, whatever you want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you watched that one.
I did not.
Very, very, I think it was 1999, 2000, 2001 ish. And very fish people ish story. People, husband and wife, or just got married, goes like an inn, and they get seduced by this priestess that's part fish, and a creature comes out of the well and bites people up to their hands. They're chained above it, and it's very, how to describe it. I mean, it's bizarre. Like
It sounds fun. I didn't look that fun when I was looking at it, so I didn't watch it.
I have it on DVD. I own it. I like it that much. It's been a couple years since I watched it, but it's very like, looking back at it, you could say it's like, the Shape of Water ish feel, with the like this sensuality of this fish creature that we had in that movie. And watching the In Search of Darkness documentaries, is the people that did Reanimator from Beyond, that was their next move they wanted to do, was Dagon.
Okay.
And they had elements from Beyond of the fish people in it. And he didn't get to do it because I don't recall why they said Search of Darkness, but then 13ish years later we got it. It was interesting enough, and I go, hey, there's another one here that says H.P. Lovecraft, and it was Necronomicon, which I'd have to review again, but it was short stories around the Necronomicon. So it's kind of like a Tales of Terror with Necronomicon, because the Necronomicon played a big part in a lot of H.P. Lovecraft work. He was kind of obsessed with it, let's say. Right?
Right. Okay. Yeah, I did not watch this one. Are they all like Lovecraft stories, or are they just like Lovecraft-esque? Okay.
Yeah, they're Lovecraft-esque. And I think that kind of what we could say for a lot of the stuff is inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, right? I'm not sure. We have some adaptations, but not too many, and which is amazing because he's written a lot of stuff.
Yes.
I mean, so it kind of comes into what discussion of all this is. What do we think worked and what doesn't work for these movies? What could we do differently to bring these movies or these stories justice into film?
I would say a lot of it, especially in the early days, a lot of it stuff was effects. A lot of the stuff that they talk about in the story, like, of course, like Lovecraft with, like monster fish creatures and, half person, half fish monsters, all kinds of weird stuff that they would talk about, with the practical effects back then, they could make it work. Right. But it was, not great. But I think like nowadays they could do a way, way better job. Poe, there's a lot more, I guess it's kind of cinematic tricks that they could do now. There's a lot more things that are accepted now. It won't be as theatrical as it was. Don't get me wrong; those theatrical ones were good for their time period, but I don't think it would work in today's world. But I would say for Lovecraft, at least, the effects, as we see with Colorado Space. Colorado Space had really good effects. I think they really got across what Lovecraft originally wrote in his stories. And I think it was done very well. And I think, especially the Lovecraft thing, I think that's what it needs, is just better effects. And I think we're there.
So so we have this resurgence of Lovecraft. How can we bring Poe stories back to the forefront? We're looking at 60 years plus of some of these movies being out. I would say that these don't need to be the hour and a half movies. That we could have almost like an anthology of Poe stories as like an episodic thing. Like one episode is a Poe story, and it could be a 45-minute episode. Half the runtime of a movie as a TV show. Um, Now, I think a lot of the problems we had in the past was we still see it today is a lot of Lovecraft, a lot of Poe does not have happy endings. The guy who we were not supposed to be rooting for wins, or something like that. And I think we've seen it in the Hollywood horror movies where the studios come in there and say we want a happy ending. Can we? Do you think having more adherence to we're rooting for this protagonist, which is not a good person? You know what I mean? Do you think that would be a good way to have it as closer to a TV episode format or length and more adherence to it? Or do you think, obviously this work as a play, as radio broadcast easier because of the internal monologues and narrations?
No, I definitely think that could work. I mean, especially in now, I think people are ready for that. I mean, you look at stuff like, like Black Mirror, right? It would be kind of similar. So you're having like, totally different stories every week. But, a lot of Black Mirror episodes, people are not good. I mean, they're just, bad people, more or less. And people love those episodes, and it's a show that works. And I think, especially in today's world, I think they're ready for that. I think they're ready for like Poe stories being told in the Poe way. But I mean, Poe, you go by how it's originally written, it's kind of like classy horror, right? I think that's, that could be a good thing to go on. Because, a lot of, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of the horror nowadays is kind of like, low, grotesque kind of gory horror. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that that's what most of it is. And you could go for some classy horror that, doesn't necessarily have to show like, gore and violence all the time, but still tries to scare you nonetheless.
So I think it could work. Like refined Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
I think that would work. I thought there was something about that was supposed to come at some point in time. I read about it once. I didn't hear anything about it since. And obviously with Mike Flanagan doing, The Fall of the House of Usher, I feel like he, with his other stories he's done, especially the Haunting series, is he does a lot of research for his material. And I'm hoping that what he does well enough that we can kind of bring that resurgence back. Like, I think Poe has been ingrained in our lives for so long that we have it on The Simpsons, that we see all this stuff. And just like I said, with Lovecraft, we have, everyone knows who Cthulhu is. No one knows what he stands for necessarily or much about it. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to see, especially these early adopters of horror writers, because we have our Stephen Kings, we have our Joe Hills, we have our Clive Barkers that, also had, you could arguably say, bad adaptations of their stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, is there something in particular you'd like to see come back? Or like to see in these formats to bring these stories back into more of a traditional, I'd say, gothic style horror? Does it have to be modern day, or can it be set in the past?
I mean, it could be both, but I don't know. I think that's why Lovecraft hit such a strong note. Is I think it really does fit perfectly in that time period. That time period that he was, originally, wrote it in. I know most of the stuff he wrote was kind of like, late 1800s or 1900s. At least the setting was.
Yeah.
And I think that really worked for that level of horror, like old kind of ritual secrets and stuff like that. And I would really like to see something, kind of combining all of the, like Cthulhu mythos stuff together. Because a lot of those stories are talking about the same, old gods, right? Or the same old ones. I think you could just kind of take those all together, the big well that you can draw things from, put them all together and then build like a, not necessarily different movies, but, like maybe like a show that combines all of those things together. And you got plenty of places you can go, right? I mean, you have plenty of places that you can, go to, or wind your way around to, because plenty of characters, plenty of stories. You can have a big combined world with all of them, and then there's a few seasons of content there. I
So
would
like
say.
a Castle Rock type show, where Castle Rock was Stephen King
Yeah.
world with especially the main area with Derry, and they call back to events, and they could have different stories in there, like kind of like
Yeah.
that the mythos being the universe, kind of centered around Necronomicon and the old ones.
Yeah. So yeah, if it happened, yeah, I would like to see, either in that classic era of what is it? Is that the Victorian era? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the correct time, but it's around that time period. Either it would be like that, or it would be like modern day with like technology and stuff. I think that would be cool too. As like going back to these old kind of ritual sites, or maybe even like something where it does like timeline jumping, right? So where like you have like modern people researching things that happened a long time ago, and then you could have a Victorian era people acting out what they're researching in the future. You could kind of jump back and forth that way. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, do you see, just kind of transitioning here, like how can we we have these short stories, right? How come do you think like we can have a Stephen King or Joe Hill write a 20-page short story and get 10 children out of the corns out of it? Like, do you think there's anything different with their stories, or is it because it's more modern that we're able to adapt it better now, almost 200 years later at this point in
time? Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, specifically Stephen King, I think that's what he does well, is he connects with people on different levels of things, right? So I mean, like you talk about Children of the Corn, like what is Children of the Corn about? It's about kids like separating themselves from adults and then trying to live their own lives, right? And it goes horribly, horribly wrong. Now, if if the first one does well, if that, whatever, basic story does it for you, then you can keep remaking the same movie, is essentially what they're doing.
Right.
Is, they just keep remaking the same movie over and over again with different casts and slightly different stories, but it's all basically the same idea. So yeah, if it works really well the first time, they'll keep doing it until it stops making money. So until they stop making money off of Children of the Corn movies, they're going to keep making them.
Do you think it's a product of their time? Like these, like Poe and Lovecraft were really ahead, where we didn't have these mediums to properly convey it to the point where we can do that resurgence. Like a story is a story. You're not going to rewrite the books that way, right? The next logical step would be the movie or the TV show.
Right. Yeah. And they didn't have it back then. You're like, I mean, like, yeah, you wrote the book and that was it. Like there was no other next step. Right. They had like theaters and plays, but they didn't like adapt books into plays. I mean, I'm sure they did, but not that often. Right. I mean, so it would be a very rare thing, especially for a horror story,
right,
to end up being a play.
Yeah. I think, as we, touched on, the modern horror directors and writers are taking influences from Lovecraft and Poe. Like they were, I think, the help starting of that trend, right? Obviously, we have Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker, that even to the point H.G. Wells, classic literature, if you're going to call it classic literature versus Poe or Lovecraft. I think more people have read probably H.G. Wells than Lovecraft.
Yeah, probably. I mean, because it appeals to a wider audience. I mean, again, you have something like, you put the word horror on things and you're going to alienate, a good half of people at least. Because there's a lot of people that just, don't want to be scared and don't want to read about anything scary. They want to read about, happy or interesting things, whatever it is,
Right. And I think
so. Like, if you have a story like an interesting, like adventure story, like an H.G. Wells story, I mean, that appeals to a lot of people. I mean, you got to turn some people off, but a lot less people than you will if you put horror on it.
And I think this is a good way to talk about kind of our next piece of before times and beginnings of stuff like that is universal monsters, right? Everyone knows them. Mm-hmm. They are a part of everyday. I would almost say media at this point, right? So, mm-hmm. Universal monsters. We have our classic monsters. We have Dracula, we have Frankenstein's monster, we have Invisible Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, and the Wolfman, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we discussed, the first movies were typically horror, and they had atmosphere and stuff like that. And we get, the 30s and 40s period, and even some, I think, 50s was the reign of the Universal monsters movies. We have Dracula, obviously written um, by Bram Stoker, right? And Bela Lugosi played him, and now he is the voice of Dracula, even to this day and age. We have what are those movies? I can't think of Hotel Transylvania, where
Right.
the classic Dracula voice is Bela Lugosi's native tongue of him speaking.
Right.
Like, I love the Universal monsters. I think they are a good cornerstone of horror as we know it, right? So we have Dracula from folklore. We have the Wolfman, also from folklore. And then we have Invisible Man, which is from H.G. Wells. Not necessarily horror, but science, right? He creates a potion,
Mm-hmm.
goes invisible, and each sequel that we had of Invisible Man was a different character playing the Invisible Man. It was never the same character. It was never, there's Invisible Woman, Invisible Agent, all different people taking the same formula, essentially. And then we have, like I said, Creature from Black Lagoon. We have the Mummy, where was it the early 1900s, 1920s, where the huge fad was digging up the Egyptian pharaohs and stuff like that.
Yeah, man. They did. I mean, they did such horrible things with all the Egyptian stuff, dude. Like I was reading the other day, I was reading an article where they had a paint. It was called Mummy Brown, and it was literally a paint made from ground up mummies. Yeah. Like they would get mummies from Egypt, grind them up, and make paint out of them. I mean, that's how the ridiculous level it got to. That's right. Anyway.
So
I digress, but it was just shocking.
Right. And I'd say that as far as cinema is concerned with horror, that these staples, everyone's watched them at some point in time. At least one of them. We may not consider it scary anymore. It's black and white. We're talking almost about 90 years ago at this point in time. And they were more atmosphere. They were more play-like. They were the big set pieces like we were discussing in the post stuff. And I think what kind of derailed them a little bit is we ended up with these movies being comedies by the end of them, right? The last runs of the Universal monsters were Abbott, Costello, Meat, whoever. And I think in the very short time frame. But, like I said, vampires, we have lots and lots of movies about vampires. And, Frankenstein monster, everyone knows the story. It's a science experiment gone wrong, which I think is a classic storytelling in horror. I could argue that Jurassic Park is the same formula. It's a science experiment that goes awry. You could say Westworld is that as well. It's science, that we didn't necessarily understand, and the next step of it, right, with robots. Westworld was written that way with the idea of computers and our fear of it, and Jurassic Park, the fear of the science of cloning the next logical step, both by Michael Crichton. I think he took a lot of inspiration from the classic Universal monster storyline. Now,
that's fair.
Now, like I said, we had these 30s, 40s, early 50s. Then we kind of went into, the B sci-fi movies. Then we have the Poe movies. And then, Hammer Horror, the British production company, came back and tried to make these creatures scary again. It's the 60s and the 70s where we can show blood, where we can have the implications that are there. We can show kind of death that was not necessarily implied in the Poe stuff, but just a couple years later, a decade later, we're able to start doing more with horror. And I think that was a good way of introducing the public back to these monsters, these creatures, what have you, to lead into the big explosion of horror in the 70s and 80s that we got. And I think just like, the early Universal monsters is the 80s, unfortunately, we started seeing these fall back to comedic roots. We have Monster Squad, you have My Best Friend's a Vampire, where it became 80s comedy movies. Instead of, Abbott Costello, we have 80s comedies. I'm not.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She would fall in there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The original. Right. The Christy Swanson original one. Starring Paul Rubens, don't forget.
Yes. Now, we also then had, in the early 90s, we have two examples of the resurgence. It seems every 20-ish years, 25-ish years that we have this resurgence, right? We have, De Niro playing Frankenstein's monster. We have two actors doing awful British accents of Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves in Dracula.
Huh.
And I would
even Keanu Reeves was not happy with his performance in that.
Poor Gary Oldman. I think he's great in the movie. Just it wasn't done well enough, because I felt like we're trying to have that resurgence, and we just never took off.
Well, again, I mean, this is kind of like where I, jump into this. So we're like, they're remaking old movies, right? Now you look at those old movies, and at this point in time, those movies are considered cliche. They're considered stereotypical. They're considered, generic, right? Now, I mean, those originals when they came out, I mean, I didn't watch them when they came out, obviously, because I wasn't around. But I didn't really get into them, because by the time I started, moving into the horror realm, they were already old. They were already old news, cliche, stereotypical. Like, I didn't really have anything to do with it, because you go to watch a Dracula movie, and then there's like 30 Dracula movies, and they all look ridiculous, and half of them have ridiculous names.
Yes.
So I'm like, I don't really care. I don't really want to get into this. So they're trying to remake those old movies, when a lot of the people that were being aimed towards had a kind of attitude at the time of like, they were tired of the rehashing of the same old story, because again, it had been done badly so many times. Like, they don't care anymore. Like, they don't want to see this same movie again. I mean, that's what they were trying to do. I don't think it was different enough. It didn't have enough of like any kind of different spirit or energy to it that was going to change anybody's mind. It was like they were going back to the same kind of stereotypical cliche story that had been around at that point for 80 years, right? So yeah, they didn't do anything. I mean, they could have done, interesting, different stuff to like drag people in, but they really didn't. They tried to remake the original in a more modern way, but not even a modern setting. It was still that old setting, but it was the same story, just made better with like today's equipment. Again, well, like you said, well, not bad actors, but bad acting.
Now, would you say it was just more of like, hey, let's remake it in color and just leave it at that? Are we looking at like a Psycho type scenario where we had the Vince Vaughn Psycho in the 90s as essentially Psycho, but 35 years later?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like a shot for shot, like exact remake. I mean, they weren't that bad, but yeah, again, I don't think they were different enough. I think they just thought, well, we could just remake them in the modern world and then put modern marketing on them, and it'll take off. And they did pretty well, but they didn't do great. They didn't do well enough for them to keep going.
Right. And do you think they maybe were trying to do the old stuff because by that point in time, slashers were essentially dead? 80s were full of slashers. Early 90s, people were tired of slashers, right? We already had 8, 9, 10 of the same slasher movies at that point in time. Right. I'm just wondering if that resurgence is what we're seeing. Is that, the resurgence we had with Hammer, we got past the sci-fi time frame. We can't, let's go back to this. I think they tried to do that again.
I think there was definitely that gap. I think there was definitely a want for something new and interesting. And again, they tried taking advantage of that, but I think they just failed. They tried remaking something that had already existed before in basically the same way, only with modern technology. And it, again, yeah, that it wasn't what those people were missing. It wasn't what those people were looking for. So it just kind of, again, I mean, it made money. It's not like it, it's not like it bombed or anything, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't big enough to make Dracula 2.
Right. Yeah. Now, so then we have those, and then like I said, we have Allan the Chipmunks being the Wolfman, Dracula being like Scooby Doo, very very watered down and mass produced ideas of it. I don't think that helped things in that time period.
No, that stuff takes a long time to wear off.
But then comes along The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. Now, I'd say a very big departure from story. Now, it's still Imhotep, and you still have the premise behind it the same, but now we're, Indiana Jones in it a little bit. It's a very action-heavy movie.
Right. Yeah. It's an action adventure movie with horror elements. It's not a horror movie. It's an action adventure movie with horror elements.
Right. But it did well, and I really enjoy that movie as well. I really like The Mummy Returns. Now, it also spawned some of the worst CG we've ever seen. But I think that's kind of the path that it seemed like we were going to start. It's like horror's not going to work for us anymore with these old stories. They're almost 100 years old. Let's make them action. And I think that was working. And then I think the next movie we had as a remake of that would be Hollow Man. Arguably it's a very good movie with Kevin Bacon. Very not horror but suspense thriller-ish.
Oh yeah, they definitely put that darker edge on it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So where the guy was not entirely stable,
right?
When he took it, and it just kind of pushed him over the edge, and then he became like an antagonist. So where and a lot of the other Invisible stories, it either skirted the line or was even on protagonist's side.
He was the first Invisible Man was a thief. He stole the formula and used it for thieving.
Right.
And then about that time frame, we got Dracula 2000. I would say the next Dracula we had was Dracula 2000 after the Bram Stoker Dracula in the early
90s. Dracula 2000. I remember I saw this movie in the theater. I don't remember why. I don't remember what, because at that time I wasn't, heavily going to the theater. I don't know why I saw that movie in the theater. Maybe I was bored somewhere. Anyway, I did like it because, depending on what world or realm you're in, vampires are sometimes affected by silver, sometimes not. And it's like in the Marvel universe, silver hurts vampires, but in most other universes it does not. But in that one, they gave I thought they kind of broke down, okay, these are all the weaknesses of the vampire, and here's why. And they gave you exactly why. I thought it fit really well with actually giving that backstory as to what Dracula is and why all these weaknesses and things happen. And I thought it was this good. I thought they wrapped it up really well. I mean, overall the movie wasn't a 10, right. But it was enough interesting things were happening where I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Dracula being Judas. But that's
right.
Reason why he cut off the head. Judas was hung. Silver because of the silver gold, the silver pieces. Cross, obviously Christianity. And there were 2 more movies in that series. I think there's a Dracula 2001 and a Dracula 3000. Yeah,
really?
Those were awful. Just
I didn't even know they existed.
I think it was it the first one or was it the second one that they had him a net over him where he had to count?
Where he had to count?
Yeah, they lured. They went into the idea that.
You sure this wasn't a Sesame Street episode?
No, vampires are obsessed with counting. It's if you threw a bucket of grains of rice on the ground, he wouldn't be able to after you until he stopped and collected them all and counted them. I think that was Dracula 2001 that they went into that.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't remember. It's been a while.
Yeah. And that was kind of the end of the Universal monsters that we saw for all. Now we got whole bunch of stuff with young adult, with obviously Twilight and vampires, and it became, I think, watered down again. Right? It's lost its edge.
Yeah.
And then, well, then we hear these rumblings of the Dark Universe. I don't recall if the 2010 Benny the Bull Wolfman was part of it.
Technically not, but I believe after it started, I believe they were, because it did not pick up as well as they were hoping, so they were trying to add some blood into it by like possibly trying to bring in other movies that had done well with the characters that they could try to build off of, and I think that was one of them. But I don't think it was technically officially part.
I think the first official one they said was then Dracula Untold.
Right.
Which I'm like, oh, great, we're gonna have this Dracula movie. I'm like, really like to see where they're going with it. I didn't go see it in theaters. I saw it advertised, but never go saw it. But then they're like, oh no, sorry, that wasn't the first one we're trying to do. Here's The Mummy with Tom Cruise. Which, I mean, Tom Cruise has done horror, if you will, Interview with the Vampire, arguably horror, right? But he's more action, and Tom Cruise's The Mummy was definitely more action.
Yeah, I watched Dracula Untold. I thought it was good. It was fun. It was like it was kind of like an action movie, right? It was like a superhero-y action movie. They were trying to make Dracula into like a hero. I mean, well, probably more like an anti-hero, right? And it was, it was entertaining. It was, I wasn't upset that I watched it. I mean, have I watched it since then? No. I mean, it's not, it wasn't like a movie that I would want to own or anything, but it was entertaining enough when I watched it,
Yeah.
Would I be upset if that was part of a greater universe? No. The Mummy, I did not bother to watch, just because I heard so many bad things about it, and I can only, every time I think of that movie, I don't think I could enjoy it because I'd be thinking about it the whole time, was that goofy scream.
Yeah.
When they had, there was so many memes going around at that time with that stupid scream in there. I would not be able to watch the movie without laughing at the damn scream. I would not be able to do it. And again, it doesn't look like I missed much because everybody said it. I mean, it did not do well monetarily, and the reviews were not good. So I don't think I missed it.
They tried bringing Jekyll and Hyde. They started really trying to plant the seeds of this universe, which I don't think Tom Cruise is ever going to sign up for an expanded universe that he's going to be necessarily in like that, because he's already in one.
Right. I mean, if they paid him enough, I'm sure he'd do fine. If he had enough creative control, I'm sure he'd do.
And it's, as far as I'm aware, it's currently dead. Now,
yes.
Kind of before we go into the second to last topic is, talking about modern horror and old horror, the roots, and Penny Dreadful, the TV show. I know you watched the entirety of it. I'm pretty sure I watched the first season.
Yeah, I watched the original because I think it was three seasons. I believe the original was 3 seasons. Yeah, I watched all those 3 seasons. It did come back for a weird, like, another season, but it was a totally different cast and a totally different location. Right. I did not watch that one, but I don't think I missed much because it got canceled immediately after that. But no, the first one, it was great. I mean, I thought it was a great way to integrate all that stuff together. I mean, you had vampires, you had, the Wolfman, you had, all these different, horror kind of elements, all mixed together. And I thought they did a fantastic job. I mean, the whole Frankenstein story arcs in those were awesome. I thought they were great,
right. And Josh,
like I said, and then
Josh Hartnett's character was the Wolfman. He's Talbot was his last name, which is the last name of the original Wolfman. Was Ava Green was the bride of Dracula, and
very attractive doing so. She was kind of like the like a storyteller, like a kind of like borderline psychic storyteller kind of thing. No, the Bride of Frankenstein was actually. Did you watch Doctor Who, the revival of Doctor Who at all?
The first season with Billy Piper and Chris Eccleston.
Okay, yeah, no, Billy Piper. That's who I was going for. Billy Piper plays the Bride of Frankenstein. I don't think. I mean, no, she's in the first season. But she's in the first season. She is the lady of the night that Josh Hartnett is hanging out with.
Yep. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. In the later season, I don't know why it might happen in the first season. I don't remember. Again, I watched them all at the same time, but she ends up dying, from the consumption, which was tuberculosis. Right. And then they ended up Frankenstein ends up bringing her back as the bride of Frankenstein. So she ends up, originally trying to hang out with the original Frankenstein, guy, Frankenstein monster dude. And then, they don't get along very well. And then she starts hanging out with Dorian Gray. Right. And then, then they're horrible together. But that was a great storyline. I mean, I like that a lot. But yeah, she plays the bride of Frankenstein.
Now, would you say that was more story and action versus horror?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of weird atmospheric, dark elements to it. I mean, as it went on, it became kind of a little more abstract, because there was a lot of Ava Green was having weird breakdowns and stuff like that, and being tortured by Dracula and stuff. I mean, it was interesting stuff, but there was a lot of weird dark elements. But yeah, I would say probably more drama. I would say more than anything, there was drama in there. So it was drama with heavy horror and occasional action elements.
So do you think that is a good amalgamation of the Universal monsters and the classic literature to come back into the fray? And do you think it's kind of like an underrated show that should have gotten more attention than what it did?
I definitely think so. I mean, I think they mixed all those old, stories and movies and things together. I thought they did a fantastic job with it. I think it wasn't doing that great. I think it was doing better ratings wise towards the end, but I believe they ended up canceling it just because they didn't feel confident in the direction they were moving forward. They didn't feel the story was strong enough.
Right.
And then I know that I believe some of the actors wanted to leave the show. So instead of having them leave the show, having new people come in and write stuff that they didn't feel was up to snuff to the original stuff, they just kind of let it go. Because I believe Ava Green was leaving. I forget. I thought somebody else was leaving too.
You'll have to do the horrible 300 sequel.
She was great in it. The movie was terrible.
So then it begs the question, can we bring this back? How do we bring it back? We've seen The Invisible Man by Blumhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would say that it's necessarily, instead of going to horror, because I think we are so jaded with the Universal monsters and everything in it, that you can do horror, but it's going to have to be gore, over the top horror, right? You're going to have to do something different and make it absolute body horror, I think. But, The Invisible Man, obviously, I said it's science, pseudoscience, a great proportion goes invisible. Now, for The Invisible Man, technology. Obviously, he uses technology to create the suit to become invisible. And it's arguably more of a psychological thriller. Do you think that is a good way that if Blumhouse can continue this, the rumblings have been Ryan Gosling as Wolfman in their next thing, and they have a couple more things planned. Do you think that is the direction we can go? Psychological thrillers.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, especially in the modern technological aspect of things, because I mean, most of those monsters can be easily put into a science gone wrong scenario. I mean, arguably all of them, but I would say most of them, obviously Wolfman, Creature of the Black Lagoon, all these things can be genetic accidents and, whatever, shit like that, easily explained away. The only one that's not it would be Dracula. That's because the scariest part of him is that he's so old. He's hundreds of years, old, centuries old, if not millennia old. And that's part of his whole thing is that, he's so old because he's gained all that power over the years and stuff. That's what makes him as strong as he is. Now, if you just make somebody a vampire, it's not as scary as like actual Dracula. But I mean, you could, tweak things a few here and there. I'm sure it can be done well. I mean, I'd just say that would be the one that would take the most tweaking. But the other ones are pretty easily fit into the technological.
Could we explain Dracula and vampirism as a blood-borne pathogen or virus?
Yeah, I mean, it's been done before. I'm just saying, as far as the whole centuries old thing, I don't know if you can get that out of it. But I mean, you can just take that element out. I'm sure, as long as it's done well. And I'm sure, I mean, they've done a good job so far. I'm sure they could. I'm sure they could do a good job.
I mean, do you want to? Do you think you want to see the entire ensemble of creatures come back into the fold?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was, as long as they, take the time to do it well. I mean, like Invisible Man, it was good. It was interesting. It was like, it was more like a, like you said, psychological horror of like, am I going crazy? Am I not? Is this real? Is it not real? I thought it was great. And I think, the team that did that did a fantastic job. So I think they could, take out other stuff as long as they give it that same, energy, that same effort. I think it could be great.
Now, I would say that the Wolfman could be, the idea of lycanthropy is, some people thought they're wolves, but they're not. Could we use that as a, am I going crazy type of this, or I have this disorder or disease that makes me act like a wolf? Could we not necessarily be a wolf, but like, I mean, you know what I mean, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, wouldn't it be great if he was a high school kid and he would be a wolf playing basketball?
Of course.
I mean, that would be fantastic.
I agree.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think the whole thing about Wolfman is he needs to be hairy, man. He needs to be furry. Like, that's like the thing with Wolfman. So like, I mean, if you show it like only from his perspective, where he thinks he's got hair all over him, sure, that could work.
I mean,
and then maybe the ending like twist is that he's watching videos of himself when he thought he was a Wolfman, and it's just him, without all the fur and shit, and he's not actually a Wolfman. I mean, that would be cool, but again, it's not really Wolfman.
You would say that Wolfman has to become a wolf.
I would say that's what the definition of Wolfman is. Right?
I mean, obviously, Frankenstein, with all the modern medicine and science that, trying to do, organ transplant, head transplants, that the science is still, like, the idea of the science is still there, that we could still do that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that would definitely be one of the easier ones to science away.
And I like I said, I could argue the Creature from Black Lagoon is a love story. We already got that with The Shape of Water.
There we go.
Right.
Just bring him on in. Just bring him on in.
Do you think with the use of technology, science, and psychological thriller or diseases, we can bring most of these back into the fold
then? Yeah, I mean, it easily can. And then if you bring Shape of Water in, you can say it's an Oscar-winning movie.
Exactly. I mean, that's my hope with this universe that Blumhouse is doing. It doesn't have to be connected to anything. I don't want it to be connected to anything else. I just want the creatures to come back, and that we can have, because obviously these were made well before we were born. A good way to bring these back. That is, I think, this my best case scenario.
Well, yeah, a good, honest, serious telling of those stories. I told it from a modern eye, of course, but yeah, stories that are literally like almost 100 years old at this point.
Right.
But yeah, definitely room for it to be done, and I hope it does.
Yeah, I mean that's all I can hope for, and just people support it and stand behind it, and it's not action oriented garbage at this point.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to close it out there, or you got anything else you want to say?
That's all I got to say
about it. All right. So yeah, stay tuned for next week. We'll be talking about the new movie Prey and the whole Predator franchise behind it. Until next time, I'm Salem saying long live the new flesh.
Graveyard saying, have you checked on the children? See you next week.
Bye.